Planet Productions podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss Ward, Wildbow's return to the world of parahumans. My name is Matt Freeman, and this is Scott Daly.
No jokes, Matt?
Too sad.
But theater is all we are.
Touché.
As you said, this is the podcast where you and I eagerly dive into Wildbow's world of villain power struggles, giant tree monsters, and alien-based death powers as we analyze and interpret this ongoing web serial. This week, we take a break from Torch and cover all of the special week-long event arc, Eclipse. So we're going to be covering the whole arc this time, Matt, chapters X.1 all the way through X.8. We haven't gotten to cover a whole arc in one go in a while now. It's been 4 months since we caught up to Ward. So this is an exciting time.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm glad to revisit our roots actually and get our whole episode deep dive into a single arc mojo on.
Yeah, not to say that I don't like getting to dive really deep into the 2 chapters a week we do. I really do enjoy that, and there were times when I was prepping for this week's episode that I was like, man, I have stuff to say about this, but I don't feel like I have enough to say to where I had to just move on to where we were doing this just 2 chapters at a time. We could have gotten into that stuff. But I love getting to analyze this arc is a complete story, and it's a section of a larger story, but it very much comes back on itself. It very much comes to a sort of resolution, and getting to see that from the beginning to end and getting to talk about that all at once was a real joy, and I'm so looking forward to this episode.
Yeah, I agree. I find that there is some kind of advantage to being able to encompass the whole arc of the thing in one conversation, even though we can go deeper into the minutia in the 2 chapter episodes. This seems more, I mean, there's an advantage to like a higher altitude view. You know, you can pick out things that are larger level trends and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm excited.
Yeah. So let's do it.
And on that note, yeah. So because this is going to be a long one, we're just going to go ahead and defer our discussion of the discussion question from last time to next week's episode. And that was, of course, what's your favorite example of descriptive writing from Wildbow? Well, we're going to talk about that next week. And we're not going to ask a discussion question this week. We're just going to kind of let that one float, give y'all more time to submit your favorite piece of descriptive writing from Wildbow, and we'll catch up with that later. Because there's plenty to talk about today.
That's putting it very mildly.
So without further ado, let's dive into chapter X.1.
Yes.
And as we begin, we quickly notice that Eclipse plays with perspective to a significant degree, because what we're seeing here at the start isn't so much what is happening as what Ashley is recalling.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the wrinkles we have to keep in mind all throughout this thing. The structure of this arc is not, we've now flashed back in time and are seeing the events of the Boston games. It's not that. It's literally we're taking a peek into Ashley's memory, and we have to know that memory can be warped and distorted and rewritten. And that's before we take into account that the Ashley that we know in Ward is not the Ashley we're seeing in this memories, but a clone of that person whose memories were crafted by Riley. And we'll get to what all that means later. But I think that's something you just, when you're kind of absorbing this arc, those are kind of things you have to keep in mind, that this is not a typical flashback type of structure.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like, we're quite disoriented. And I like this next bit where she watches one of her pills swirl the drain, and then she's interrupted by a guard who demands that she get rid of the glass bottle she's using. And she's agitated by the encounter in particular because it's a big man throwing his weight around, and we'll eventually learn why that specifically bothers her.
Yeah, this is such a strong opening to the chapter, and indeed to the whole arc. And I want to focus some real attention on this, even though we have 8 entire chapters to cover here, Matt, because as she's watching the pill circle a drain, she thinks back to her life before all of this, and which by the way is like setting us up for those flashbacks. Like we're literally laying the treads down to set up this move back into the past moment. And we get this understanding that how she's been on the edge of a knife for so long and acting as if she's on the edge of the knife, acting as if she's just circling that drain has become instinctual for her. She doesn't even think about it anymore. That's just who she is. But she's decided she's going to go to jail now. And like we said last week, she's hopeful that will mean once and for all, someone else will have to worry about this part of her. She will finally get to rest. And I think we kind of know that that's probably not exactly going to be the case. But she's terrified here. And I love that she takes that fear and like attaches it to this pill that she's watching circle this drain. And she wanted to see if it somehow survived despite the odds. She wanted to see it fall at the same time to see if she could spot what finally doomed it. So I want to know what's going to happen here. I want to know if will I finally succeed? Will I finally pull off what I wanted to? Or if I'm going to fail, I want to know how that is so I can know how to predict it. And what I love about the scene is I think it kind of like perfectly reflects the final moments of chapter 8 of this arc. And we'll get to that in a bit, but I want to think back on that when we get there because it's a big circle. It's a big circle.
Yeah, it certainly is, and we definitely will. I think that there's a lot of symmetry, and I'm just going to say up front that like I think the metaphor here is like an eclipse. The light is slowly occluded until it reaches a full eclipse, and it's completely dark, and then the moon or whatever moves out of the way again, and you begin to see the light again, and there's a symmetry to the progression of the arc in terms of getting darker and then perhaps getting lighter. But I think it's more complicated than that because it's not like the last chapter of this arc is particularly light. But anyway, we'll talk about that.
I mean, I think more hopeful is. I think hope is the big word here, and that light represents hope. So I think you're absolutely right that's where the metaphor of eclipse falls in. I'd like, as we leave this moment, I really like that she's observing this pill and she wants to know what happens, and she's interrupted by this guard. She never gets to see what happens to the pill. By the time she looks back at it, it's already down the drain and gone, and she doesn't see exactly how it happened. And I think that's this big guy is some imagery that relates back to her trigger event and the man who bossed her around and abused her. But also, I think this may be a hint that maybe this prison thing is not such a great idea because like she's like trying to see what's going to happen. She's trying to observe how she's going to be and what's going to happen, and she's rudely interrupted by this guy that's going to boss her around, and it's kind of going to be what prison's like.
Right. Yeah. It also reminds us of Bob and, the fact that it's not a coincidence that was the kind of person who she killed.
Yeah.
And then we get this great moment where she's, trying to keep herself from kind of snapping at him in her characteristic kind of, barbed way. And she's thinking it was as if an invisible hand was flipping a coin. Heads good to go. Statement made. Tails, she would say something like what she had intended, except it would be wrong in a way that only seemed clear to her in the aftermath. There would be another invisible coin flip after that to see if she could stop herself there. Yeah,
man. And I think this is what this interlude can really do for us, because we know from the past how we've learned from Ashley telling us how every move, every decision, every moment is ruled by this thing inside her that's threatening to spiral out of control. But we don't really get that until we're truly in her head. And that's what Eclipse does for us. And I think a coin flip is just a really wonderful way to visualize that because you see every moment, every decision, everything she says, everything she does is a choice, but it's a choice that seems to be out of her hands. It's a coin flip. She doesn't even get to choose between the two. It's just luck or fate or whatever you want to call it. It's just flipping a coin each time. Am I going to kill this guy? Maybe. Let's see what the coin says.
I particularly like the idea that she can see that it was wrong in the aftermath, in retrospect. That's because this is modern day Ashley who has self-awareness, and she's able to even if she doesn't have self-awareness in the moment, she's able to look at her actions and say like, oh, that thing where I went supervillain monologue, that was actually a bad idea. And she's fully capable of kind of seeing that and owning it and recognizing it. Whereas when we jump back into Ashley of the past, the difference here is that she would always, double down on her ranting and paranoia, and really had no forcing function pushing her away from that. And that's why things just got worse and worse for her.
But isn't that tragic in a way? Because if it's truly a coin flip, if it's truly like, and maybe this is just her negativity speaking, maybe it's she has more control over this than she thinks she does, but it's truly a coin flip, and you are able to realize that the things you are doing are wrong, but are almost powerless to stop them. That almost becomes more tragic to me. Like, she's just more aware of this chain of events, but she still struggles with control over knocking that first domino.
Yeah.
I just mix metaphors there, but fine.
I mean, it definitely is more tragic in a way because you can see her struggle now, whereas it wasn't so much struggle before as just kind of pointless suffering, and just endlessly making mistakes that she had no awareness or understanding of. At least, now she has understanding of the mistakes she's making, and that makes it, that makes it more tragic. I agree with you there. But we have seen her, avoid swerving into the ditch at least a couple times.
Yeah.
And then, of course, aggressively swerving into the ditch at least once. So,
well, she's claiming that the pills that she's taking are part of what helps control the coin flips. And maybe she's just selling herself a little short, and maybe she's more in control of which side that coin lands on than she's willing to give herself credit for.
Yeah. So we'll have to see where her character goes from here. So she's then escorted back to the room where her pre-trial hearing is to be held, and she's trying for like a regal bearing, and Kenzie is there because Kenzie is always everywhere first. And after Ashley sends her away to get some refreshments, Ashley deduces that she gave the lawyer a doctored video making it look like her murder of Bob was more defensive than it actually was, and Ashley is sure to tell the lawyer not to let it be shown. Yeah,
that's very sweet of you, Kenzie, but I'm happy Ashley noticed this and put a stop to it. It's funny that we talked about this when the murder happened. We talked about all the extenuating circumstances and how you could make arguments one way or another. And we've seen that the book is not going to go there, really. But Kenzie wanted to.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, it tells us that Kenzie is basically willing to commit crimes for Ashley, which, I mean, we kind of already knew she was willing to go here. So
yeah, and that's interesting too, because we're forced to contemplate now, what kind of stuff will Kenzie get up to without Ashley around to hold her in check? Will Victoria be enough to hold Kenzie in check to notice these things? Because in this moment, Ashley knew Kenzie was probably going to do this. Ashley called it and called it correctly. We have no indication whether anyone else on the team was aware that this was happening or had any knowledge to think that Kenzie might try something like this. So it gets you worried. Like, Victoria's great, but she's trying to juggle all these members of this team. Is she going to be enough to support and put Kenzie in check when she needs it?
Right, because Victoria, she flew to the hearing. We saw her do that. We didn't see any indication that she was suspicious. Whereas as soon as Ashley gets there, she sends Kenzie away and then is like, what did she give you? Like she
right.
knows Kenzie so well that she's just like ahead of her, basically.
Kenzie, like she reads from Kenzie looking a little too confident and maybe giving her a slight smirk, and she deduces from there. She's like, oh, of course. So she knows her more than anyone. So this makes me like, it makes me worried.
Yep. So now Victoria arrives, and we see Ashley. From Ashley's perspective, she gives Victoria a similar fashion once-over to the type that Victoria frequently aims at others.
Yep.
And she thinks to herself, who would I have been if I'd never had powers? If I was born into a different situation, would I have resembled Victoria?
This is fascinating to me. And I think it's so instructional on how we tend to observe people and how perspective shifts under understanding of things. Ashley looks at Victoria and says, if I hadn't gone through all my terrible shit, I could be like this person. And Victoria would probably hear that and be like, "Are you kidding me? Like, I've gone through so much shit. You have no idea." And it's just like it's kind of a grass is always greener thing, where like you can tell she admires Victoria on some level and looks up to her and thinks how much better I could have been like this. This is what I could have had. And Victoria would not see it that way.
Yeah, man, like, I don't want to jump around in the arc too much, but there's so many interesting beats of like how she thinks of Victoria, where like there's moments like this where she clearly kind of admires her, and then later she gets irritated with her and then starts thinking that she's an idiot, but then like immediately goes back to admiring her, and it's this very interesting like grudging admiration. And I mean, it says a lot about her character and how she has so much trouble, you know, actually relating to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, and she has trouble admitting closeness to people, which we will learn is very understandable. So this kind of push-pull, I hate you, no, I respect you relationship with Victoria makes a lot of sense in that context.
Yeah. So here we have an important moment, which I'm not even sure if this is the first mention of the hands, but it's chronologically, I suppose, the first mention of the hands. Ashley's hands gripped her upper arms. There were no good days anymore. There were the bad days, and there were the days she dreaded the bad days. And it's important to note, you know, as you're going back through this arc, that this is before her powers. This is before everything. This focus on the hands, this mantra of there being no good days, only bad days. This is what her life was like before her trigger event. This was her whole life.
Yeah, and I'm glad you called this out here, because you're absolutely right that, look, this arc is incredible, and it's incredible because it has these thematic motifs running through it, and the hands are one of the big ones. Ashley's focus on her hands. We hit this beat over and over and over again throughout the story, and it makes sense. Her hands are the source of her power. It's where her power comes out of, and therefore they're like symbolic of her lack of control. And so as her hands change and are damaged and are forcefully turned into other things throughout the course of this arc, that is instructive of Ashley's journey. So we've kind of distilled Ashley down to the symbol that we follow throughout the arc, and it's beautifully done. It comes in just when it needs to, and kind of leads you through Ashley's change. And I think it's great. And it's Matt, this was written in a week. It's in a week.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we have so much to talk about in such detail that you're right. There's a danger that we might avoid, that we might, you know, miss pointing out that this is like an absolute beautiful like treasure. And I'm so glad that we got this arc, and I love it in its entirety, and this focus on this tragic character, and just made me so sad and gave me so many emotions.
And there's something else going on here too, right? We're not only are we set like in this 1-2 sentences that you've pulled together, we set up the hands, the motif of the hand symbol throughout the thing, and we also set up this idea of bad days and the days she dreaded the bad days, which is another beat we're going to hit multiple times throughout the course of this arc. As Ashley moves through this journey, she thinks back on that is her life. There are bad days, and there are days that you dread the bad days, and that's all you have. That's all you have. You have nothing to look forward to. There's never a good day. There's never hope. There's never looking to tomorrow and looking to the future. It's just that. And we're going to circle back around to that beautifully by the end of this arc. And it's so good.
It's just such a like beautifully succinct expression of what it's like to be in that headspace. And I've certainly never been anywhere near Ashley's headspace in these arcs, but I think everyone can relate to feeling that way at one time or another, you know. And it's just it's such a it's not overwrought. It uses like the absolute minimum number of words to say what it needs to say, that she is so without hope that she doesn't even conceive of hope being a possibility.
Yeah, and it's so much better than just saying there are bad days and worse days, right? I mean, it could have just been that. It's like, I've got bad days and I have worse days. And that's not what it's saying. It's saying I have bad days. And then even if I have what you might consider a good day, I can't even enjoy it because I believe in every fiber of my being that a bad day is coming anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It's so succinctly, beautifully done. And it's such a fabulous way of contrasting this Ashley, the Ashley we're with right now at her trigger event, to the Ashley we see throughout the Boston games, to the Ashley we see by the end of this chapter, who is a very different person, both literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, right. So yeah, this is the scene. This is Ashley's trigger event, and we're witnessing it. So what happens, of course, is her father savagely beats her mother, and Ashley cowers. And it says, Ashley made a noise of the sort that little kids made. She was 13. She wasn't supposed to make that kind of sound.
So let's, for the third time in a row, this is something that's beautifully set up that pays off wonderfully by the end of the arc. And we have to pull it because of that, so we can circle back around to it in chapter 7. But
right.
I love, the thing I want to talk about here is the idea of perspective and point of view. And I like that in these interludes, we always move to third person perspective. We're in first person when we're with the story proper, but we move into interludes. Even if it's an arc long interlude, we move to a third person perspective. But even when we do that, we never really lose the character voice. Like we don't really zoom out to a narrator, like reading the events or like retelling the story to people. We're not in Ashley's perspective, but we still have her voice. And that is what I think you can see here in this statement. She wasn't supposed to make that kind of sound. That's not an authority, a narrator making judgment, passing judgment on the voice that Ashley just made. That's Ashley's internal judgment. That's coming from her herself. She is saying, I am 13. I am not supposed to be making this kind of sound. And I think that's so important as part of her character. And I think it's why, even as we shift to third person in these interludes, we don't lose understanding of the character.
Yeah, I think that reflects on some other moments that I'm not sure if I did pull out, but specifically the ones where she like sneers at someone else for being weak.
Yeah.
And she kind of can't stand weakness, and the reason is that it reminds her of her own vulnerability. I'm not even going to say her own weakness, because it's no shame to be terrified of a monstrous person who's tormenting you. Yeah. So in this moment, Ashley tries to help her mother, attacking her father with a fireplace poker, but he easily disarms her, and when he hits her, she triggers with a power meant to break worlds, and she kills him. And then when she goes to help her mother, her power misfires again, killing her mother. And Scott, this is like the saddest trigger event like in the world, right? I mean, certainly compared to literally any of the ones we know about from the story.
Yeah, I mean, they're all like universally awful, but this one got me. And I think what really got me in this one was how her mother reacts to her trigger and to the fact that she just like disintegrated her father. I think it would be very easy to do, like, I think there's a inclination to want to do a very standard, like, shrink away in fear. Like, I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know what you are anymore. You scare me. That's not what she does here. She actually, like, seems to embrace her. She calls her over here. She looks at her white hair and calls it special. Even in this moment that she just did this horrible thing that she had almost no control over her, her mom still seemed to love her and like embraces her. Mm-hmm. And then she kills her.
Yeah.
And that just like, that makes it so much worse than it could have been.
Yeah. I mean, it's so entirely tragic, and like it's very interesting and kind of complicated, because knowing that the powers have agency almost makes you hate her power even more, because the powers don't have to be such assholes. Like this power has decided to be chaotic and uncontrolled to force her into situations where she has to use it, and killed her support system as basically its first action. And I don't know how, exactly how much like calculating foresight to put on a shard, but kind of that was my thought, was like it Ashley didn't so much kill her mother as this alien did,
Yeah. All shards are dicks. This shard is an asshole.
Yes.
But I think that's so it's very instructive for the character that Ashley is, that she doesn't just kill people that she's mad at, right? That like she loved her mother in this moment. Her mother loved her in this moment. Her mother was trying to calm her down and trying to help her in this moment. And her shard's such an asshole that she even kills her. And of course, we're going to see a very similar death repeated later in the chapter. And I think that's so important that we're establishing like that the difference in that kind of killing. Yeah.
Yep. So now, having experienced this horrible trauma, the young girl gathers her things, the things she'll need for a life of homelessness and squatting in abandoned buildings. And as she leaves, we match cut through the darkness to join Ashley with Jessica. And of course, Ashley would call her Jessica and not Dr. Yamada, because Ashley can't give anyone their honorific title.
Yeah, I guess before we move on, Matt, we should explain what we mean when we say match cut, because it's actually like a filmmaking term.
Yeah, there may be an actual literary term for this, but I like that we've decided to go with this.
There probably is, but I'm a movie guy, I can't help it. So basically throughout it's not every single section break in this arc, but throughout most of the section breaks in this arc, we have we use the little moon symbol, which by the way is great because it's like selling how unique this arc is, because our section breaks in the story proper are usually just a circle with the dot in it. I'm not sure exactly what that means. It could be a sun. I don't know, whatever. But we do a little moon here, and we break mid action and then move to a new time or place with a very similar action. So like in filmmaking, a match cut is like if someone's standing with their back turned to you with their hand raised, and then you cut to another scene with maybe the same character, maybe another character, maybe in a different place, but it's the same framed scene, it's the same gesture. It's like it's a continuation of that gesture or pose or frame, but in a different scene. And that's basically what we're doing here. Over and over again.
And usually it's not just like, oh, that's cute. It's drawing attention to a symbol or a theme by doing that.
Right.
Particularly here. I was actually thinking that possibly every transition is a match cut, either through a visual or an action, or in some cases even like a more abstract metaphorical connection. I didn't necessarily try to draw all those out because some of them I felt very uncertain about. But that, like in every case, I was able to be like, well, you could say that this aspect of this character is kind of like this thing that this person was just portraying. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of a parallelism, but it's not a visual, certainly. So
yeah.
All right. So Ashley admits to Jessica that things feel incoherent and that her mind is mixing memory and present day. And we begin to understand at this point that the structure of this chapter is more than just literary flair, that this is what we've been reading is more or less how Ashley is experiencing this chunk of time. Yamada mentions that powers have a strong tendency to mess with dreams and sleep.
Yeah, and I think this is where the genius of using those match cuts start to tie in, right? As you said, we're not just jumping around randomly between scenes for fun. We're experiencing Ashley's mind here. We're in her head, and like she's talking, as she talked about at the start of this chapter, like she hears a song that triggers a memory, like so many things. Like that's kind of how memories work in people. They just kind of meander and flow from one thing to another randomly. But usually we people retain the ability to distinguish between like where the present and the past. We can distinguish between memory and what's current. It seems like Ashley is having difficulty doing that. And these match cuts between section breaks seem to be literally like expressing that just cut of, I just immediately transition to something else. I immediately move over to a memory because this reminded me of something, or this segues into another memory, another experience, and it's kind of uncontrollable and incoherent, as she says. And I think that's how we structurally establish that in the story to match with what is going through Ashley's mind.
Yeah, and she very specifically says that the memory that she was just in felt more real than what she's experiencing now. So it's not just like a memory. It's like a replay. You know, it's something more. It's something more powersy.
Yeah, fucking shards.
Yeah. So they're talking about the end of the world here, and here's one of those beats I was talking about where Jessica says people would lose their minds if they took it at face value, and she says because they're weak. And I like that Jessica just kind of is like, let's not rehash old things. And she's just like, fine, whatever. So anyway, this scene moves on, and Ashley mentions that she wants to dig out the memories of the things that she's proud of. And she clarifies not happy memories, but memories of when she was at her best. And she won't then clarify what that means because, of course, she's talking about the Boston Games, and she knows that Jessica wouldn't really be up for that.
Yeah, and again, we get to go back and do our thing. Hey, look, Matt, this is set up for the rest of the arc, because that's what the first chapter does. And now that we're covering a whole arc at once, we can do that. And that's what we're doing here. This first chapter of this story, this independent story of Ashley and the Boston Games, is doing a lot of heavy lifting to set up what the structure of the arc is going to look like. We're talking about memories, going back to finding good memories, not happy ones, be prepared for sadness, but the ones where Ashley was at her best. So this is all setting up, this is all telling how the rest of this arc is going to go. And I think it's important because this is something we really need to carefully define here, because we're going to learn Ashley's definition of when she was at her best is probably not what most people would say. Yeah, you were great there. But she's a very different person. So we have to be very careful to define this because it matters. The difference in her definition of that is important.
Yeah, like the way you just phrased that, it makes it kind of clear that this is the time when her shard was happiest with her behavior.
Yeah.
So not when Ashley was anything close to a happy person. So this next short section in this chapter is a POV from Edict, one of the capes in Ashley's hometown. And we learn a little bit about Edict's existence, trying to balance being a mom with being a cape. And then we see her learn about the beginnings of trouble in Boston. We also get a glimpse of the PRT attitude toward Damsel. She's a troublemaker, but in some sense, she's pitiable. They all discuss arranging an accidental, quote-unquote, grocery drop-off to her location, and generally express kind of like almost parental care toward her, and they suspect that she's making her way to Boston, and they've been ordered to head there as well.
Yeah, this whole section is so clever, Matt, because once again, we're jumping back in time and using this jump to lay the groundwork for the arc. That's what this entire chapter is doing. Now we're positioning things. We're showing the start of Boston Games. We're showing how Ashley is headed there now. We're getting her on her way. But we're doing something a little weird here because we've seemingly jumped character perspective now. Now, this is not too unusual. We've had interlude chapters that have jumped between characters mid-chapter. That has happened before. But Eclipse, it turns out, is not one of those chapters, or not one of those arcs. This is the only time in the entire arc that we seem to leave Ashley's point of view. And that's because we don't. We don't actually do that. This is Ashley remembering something that isn't hers. And I think what's so clever about this, as we get to that reveal later, is this is kind of wild about subverting expectations, because this story, like I've said so many times, stories teach you how to read them, and we are here in this moment seeming to set up a chapter and set up an arc that shows that maybe in this arc we're going to jump around between characters a little bit. So it's subverting your expectation on that, to yes, mislead you, but in a way that seems very fair, because you're just kind of falling into a trap of how the structure of the story works.
Yeah, yeah.
So clever.
It's interesting. I find myself going down this rabbit hole on the last few things I've said that, like, I'm wondering, why would her shard be giving her these memories of this person who almost like loved her and wanted to take care of her? Like, this is very foreign to Ashley, and is not the kind of thing that you would feed Ashley if you were trying to undermine her and make her feel isolated. It's in some sense really nice to give her this memory. This like unambiguous, unforgeable indication that someone actually cared about her. And I just think that's really interesting that ended up in her brain.
Yeah, I mean, the pessimist in me says, her shard goes, "Hey, look what you fucked up. Congratulations."
Yeah, basically.
Remember how you thought no one ever actually cared for you? Here's all these people that did.
Yeah, that's true. Like basically at any time you could have legitimately gone in and joined the wards, even though you thought they were trying to screw you over.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. Thanks. I was almost happy about that for a second.
Well, good. My job is done.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on into X.2.
Only
Ashley,
7 more to go.
Only 7 more to go. Making great time, folks. Ashley travels very carefully, incognito, to Boston via bus. She enjoys the game of it, the cat and mouse with the authorities. She even keeps score, and she meets some young lawless kids, and she begins to worm her way into the Boston underworld. But this is a very different Ashley now. This is a much less self-aware, much younger and more raw Ashley than the one that we just left in the previous chapter.
Yeah, I think this is so important to point out, because you're absolutely right here. This is very distinctly a different kind of Ashley than we've seen in Ward before. Even Ashley in the last chapter, she feels different. And the gamification of this whole thing is such an important signifier to point out that change, that she's playing this game with herself. And it's something she kind of continues to play this game throughout this whole thing. I mean, there's a reason why metaphorically it fits that this was called the Boston Games. It seems to signify the gamification of this whole thing. And it's such an immature, childish way to look at this whole thing, this extremely dangerous and deadly power imbalance. But that is how Ashley looks at it. And there's this part here that I think points out like the immaturity of her the most. She's talking to the kids, and one of the kids says, "You don't scare easy. You'll manage. You're tough, huh?" And her response is, "Been on my own for 3 years now. Ran away. Fending for myself," she said, smiling. Like she's proud of it. Like that is a badge of honor. And someone replies with, "That's so sad." Because it is very sad. Mm-hmm. And her immediate reaction, the smile falls from her face. She immediately decides, I hate this person. This person, I don't want anything to do with them. And it's so immature to be like, look at my accomplishments. I've been on my own and doing things by myself. Is such a childish thing to brag about. No like a mature person would ever go like, yeah, I've been on my own. Look at me. As if that makes you strong by itself. And she's such a kid. She's such a little kid.
Right. Yeah. We very, very quickly sketch out like, yeah, this is a kid. This is a less, I mean, it sounds like we're like ragging on her, but we're just stating the facts in the way the text conveys it, that she's immature, impulsive, childish, and like very poorly socialized on top of that because she's been so isolated.
Yeah.
And all these things come through and they all are bad for her.
Mm-hmm.
So the youths tell her about the status quo in the city and that she should avoid Deathchester and other boroughs with similar epithets. But she likes the sound of Deathchester and she decides that she'll claim it.
Yeah. Even this feels so childish and gamey a little bit. Like, where am I going to set up shop? The one with the coolest edgelord pun name. That's where... And it's like, it's so fun. Like, yeah, Deathchester. That's the coolest one. I want that one.
She hasn't even seen it. She doesn't know what's there.
No, she picks it on a whim. It's just like, it sounds like a cool name for something.
Yeah. Right. Like she doesn't she has no idea what it would actually be like to be a warlord. She's just like, I'm
Right.
going to go do that because I watched a lot of TV and it seems like I would like it. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that she's 16 by now, right? Because she was
think
13
so.
when she triggered, and she's 16, which was basically Taylor's age, right? And like, I'm not saying Taylor was the most mature person in the world, but I think the difference is striking here, especially when we define early on that Ashley, even at 13, might have been, because of circumstances, forced into kind of a regressive type of existence where she maybe did not mature as fast as she should have even before the trigger event and everything went down. So it just kind of compounded on itself here.
Yeah. I mean, I've spent a lot of time actually thinking about the differences between this character and Taylor because even when they're being their own brand of insane, like Ashley has these flares of anger and fury and lack of control, whereas what would happen to Taylor is more like she would just like calmly and rationally be like, I guess I'll have to cut this guy's face now, and kind of, you know, almost disassociate from like the horror of what she was doing. Just very different approaches to kind of different kinds of unhinged character, and I kind of like that aspect specifically.
Yeah.
So anyway, she hands cash to one of the kids to pay for information, but to get them to drive her to Deathchester, and she's in the zone, and she's aware of being in the zone. And here we continue to sketch out her psychology, her constantly seeking this fragile high of accomplishing things and winning at the game that she set for herself.
Yeah, the zone is a really important thing to her, and it will continue to be so throughout her adventures in Boston. But I think it's really fascinating how like complicated this gets with her, like how complex of a character she is. And the most revealing thing to me in all this is when she's like driving down the street in this car, looking out at the windows, and she starts relating things back to documentaries she's watched about Roman augury practices and Emperor Caligula himself. And we'll see this a few more times throughout the arc, but again, we're going to hit that beat, is Ashley's a kid, and her persona, the theater that she puts on, is entirely constructed from the only resources she's had, television. And she's constructed so much of who she is and how she relates to things through the things she's watched on TV because she's been alone for so long, and that's the only real contact she has. And it might not be the best thing to base your whole thing on, Ashley, because like Caligula totally gets assassinated for being a crazy person. Like that's what happened, Ashley. Did you see the end of the documentary?
Oh, but that won't happen to her, though.
No, certainly not.
Yeah. So as they're driving, one of the kids asks Ashley if she wants to come over for dinner, and she dismisses the invitation out of hand without even thinking about it. And one of the other kids asks her, "What are you doing for food?" And she was annoyed at the question, annoyed that her observation of the city was being interrupted, and annoyed that she hadn't been observing the city, and that she'd been thinking about useless stuff. It was this kind of thing that dragged her down when she was in the zone.
Yeah. Showing her resistance to people here is, I think, really important. And we learn more about why the idea of eating dinner with other people is so foreign and uncomfortable with her. But I think it's really funny. And like, in this thing, she's like, how dare you ask me things like, how do you consume sustenance to survive? Like it's just
right.
like basic questions that like no one would ever think of as problematic or annoying. But
yeah.
Ashley doesn't live a normal life.
Yeah, I mean, anything related to self-care to her is almost like a weakness. And she all she has time for is in this moment, like playing the game, getting ahead, you know, being powerful, scaring people. And you know, on that note, she kind of can't wait to like awe these people. So she breaks into this empty house, and with an audience of one, she transforms into damsel of distress, stripping and annihilating the travel grime from her body, purging the dye from her hair, and then donning her black dress and wearing some scraps of material that her power leaves behind as a mask and as other decorations.
Yeah, in spite of myself, I found this really cool. Like, I know Ash is all about theatrics, and theatrics worked on me here because I was like, oh, awesome. But I very much like this little wrinkle in her power. The idea that it doesn't just totally erase everything. She describes it as, it made things swell and burst into nothing, and it made them wither. It decayed by making paint peel and wood fade and splinter, the passage of time, halting time. And the particularly dense things don't get completely destroyed. They leave by little bits, as you said, and little remnants. And I think this serves like as both like just a logical, like, hey, how can she carry around stuff if every time she uses her power, stuff gets destroyed? It's like, oh, well, some stuff is made out of her stuff that was left over from destroying. So it just like it's a very rational solution to that problem. But metaphorically, it's just she is someone who annihilates things out of existence. But even so, she can't get rid of all things. There's always a little bit left behind. Not always, but sometimes there's a little bit left behind. And yeah, I think it's very poetic.
Yeah, I like that too. And this is something that's been, in these chapters up to this point, and it's going to continue as a thread through it. But I think this is as good a time as any to point out that she's essentially disabled in the sense that she can't just she can't brush her teeth, she can't use a phone.
Yeah.
She can't reliably open doors. She can hardly do anything that involves using her hands without risking destroying, important, things in her environment, and often does so, as we see throughout the chapter or throughout the arc, actually. I just thought I'd point it out now in this moment that the whole narration of her character is absolutely filled with this caution and just severe limitation of her options by her inability to use her hands.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Her hands are not functional hands. They're weapons and weapons only.
Yep. So then we match cut from one of the youths, Ed, denying her offer for some work, to Kinsey ending her story with the same shake of her head in the therapy group.
Beautiful match cut.
Yeah, I love that. So of course we don't actually see what Kinsey's story was, but we do see that Ashley, having heard the story, thinks that she understands her and that this is someone that she can relate to. And Ashley tells Kinsey that there are some people who deserve to be alone, but Kinsey isn't that type. But Kinsey, however, emphasizes that the people that she wronged haven't forgiven her.
Yeah. Obviously pointing to herself for the whole people who deserve to be alone thing. I think that's pretty surface level subtext. That's what she kind of means there. I think this is great because we've flashed into the future from Boston games, but I think this arc has basically 3 different timelines, right? There's the present, there's the past, but then there's also the near past, where we have everything post Gold Morning. Mm-hmm. And so we've gone there, and we are seeing the first time the therapy group got together. And I think now we kind of understand why Ashley and Kinsey have grown this close bond to each other, where they rely on each other, they lean on each other, and it's because you're right that she understands Kinsey almost immediately to a very specific degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me even more curious to find out what's up with Kinsey.
Yeah,
and I think this is pretty, crucial to the flow of this whole arc, or the theme of it rather is they're discussing change, and Yamada says, "Change? Do you want to change?" And Rain answers, "That's not such a hard question."
Yeah,
which is perfect because we know Rain so well, and he'd just be like, "Of course." Like duh.
Yeah.
And then of course Ashley was silent.
Oh, it's so good because everyone has an answer to this question except for Ashley. Mm-hmm. Kinsey says yes. Tristan says yes. Sveta says, I'm doing pretty good, but I just want to make sure I don't lose this. And Ashley stays silent. And I love that it's the reason for the silence is so good, and I love what it says at the end here. Like, she asks two questions: do you want to change, and if you do want to change, what do you think that change would look like? And she's like, I can't even begin to approach the second question because the first is so far beyond me. So it's almost not, she's saying here, it's not that whether I want to change or not is irrelevant because I can't. And I think that's really what she believes here in this moment. Like, I do not have control to change. There go, my desire to do it doesn't matter. It's just totally irrelevant. And there's something really, really tragic in that. And I think it goes back to the coin flipping that we talked about earlier, that if you are aware of the things you were doing are wrong and you want to make sure those things never happen again, but your actions are determined by a seeming chance, how can you change?
That's true, but I think, the contrast between her and her alter ego at the end of this arc shows that maybe she has changed more than she thought that she ever could by the time we catch up to the present day.
I completely agree, and I think that's the conceit of the arc is that if this is the way I am, if this is who my shard is pushing me to be, if this is who my programming is pushing me to be, how can I change it? And the answer to that question is through tiny little steps, through tiny incremental things. Like that's I think when she stares her other self in the eyes at the end of this thing and we see the stark difference between the two of them, that's the conclusion, is that it's just little tiny choices that stack up over time. And it's great.
Exactly. And yeah, can't wait to get there. So yeah, now we match cut through Ashley standing alone, walking to the bonfire moot, which will be a recurring setting in these chapters. I think it's interesting that the imagery of this bonfire is the center of Eclipse. In other words, it's like it's the idea of fire and light and being eclipsed, and moving into the light, moving away from the light, things like this.
Oh yeah.
So at this moot, we're introduced to a number of players, and Scott, there are going to be so many new capes in these scenes, and I would just love to talk about each and every one. But unfortunately, this is the kind of thing that I'm going to hardcore gloss over so we can focus on like themes and shit like that.
Yeah, that's fine.
But the main thing to point out, I think, so that we kind of know what we're talking about going forward, is that we have one group, Blast Germ, which is led by Blasto and Rotten Apple, aka Fume Hood, our friend and Victoria's friend from the earlier arcs of this story. And then another of the groups is the Clockwork Dogs, led by Accord and Détente.
Yeah, these are important ones. There's a whole bunch of creepy, terrible people in the background. Orchard is gross. It's gross. But I think I guess I had forgotten that Fume Hood and Blasto had hung out in the past, or maybe we didn't know that. I honestly don't remember. But it's kind of cool seeing Blasto again and seeing him with a friend.
I'm pretty sure it was mentioned in the story, but it was pretty transient, and I assumed just like a minor little nod. But yeah, it turns out that it mattered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we get Accord, our wonderful psychopath Accord, and with a buddy, a buddy, a mysterious guy who we don't know.
It really amuses me how happy I was to get to spend time with Accord again.
Yeah, that's weird, right? You wouldn't think, but
yeah.
It's like, I missed you, buddy. I missed your exhaustion by everyone else that just doesn't fall in line to your ways, right, which are the correct ways.
It's funny, like it reminds me of how, like, I just said that thing about how you kind of relate to Ashley, even if you've never had a life anything like hers. You kind of relate to Accord too, because everyone likes things a certain way sometimes.
Sure. And
knows the feeling of people who don't know how to comply with your requirements. Mm-hmm. So anyway.
Yeah. But I think the most important part about this scene is that Ashley chooses to stay out of the limelight. She sees the groups gathering around the fire, and she decides to stay in the background, hover in the shadows while she's consolidating power. And we see here that her goal throughout this whole thing, what she wants more than anything, is respect, is an audience, is to be inside that central ring and to be treated as an equal.
Yep. So then we move on into X.3, and the previous chapter essentially flows into this one. The Clockwork Dogs are attempting to sketch out a compromise that the major players will agree to, but the less agreeable elements don't comply. And we have Accord saying, "Please don't interrupt me. All of this could devolve into petty squabbling so very easily. Let's keep this civilized. Cooperate and you have a way forward. Be stubborn and refuse and you will have nothing. It's common sense." "Common sense?" Rotten Apple asked. "I have a tattoo on my asshole." "She does," Blasto said.
He ate that rotten apple. All I can think of is how much an asshole tattoo would hurt. That would hurt so much.
That too. I was like, God. I was like, surely that's not a real thing. And then I was like, no, I'm sure that's a real thing. And no, I'm not going to look that up.
That would hurt so bad. Oh my God.
Yeah. So yes, throughout this conversation, Damsel is pretty chapped at being disregarded.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't read it as her being chapped. I thought she was generally okay with being disregarded here because she felt like that was her decision. Like she chose to stay in the shadows. She chose to stay out of the limelight. So them disregarding her is actually like them making a terrible mistake. Like there's this moment where she says they hadn't even considered the ones who were in the background. They didn't think she was a threat, and she smiles. And Detente sees her smile and smiles back at her, but she says, "Oh, you're taking it the wrong way. I'm not happy to be here. I'm just happy that you're underestimating me."
I guess I read it as like she's rankled whenever anyone doesn't fear her sufficiently. And yeah, it works in her favor strategically, but I still think she's annoyed by it. That's just kind of how I read her psychology.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's annoyance on some level, sure.
Yeah. So she walks to a nearby smaller campfire and she drums up some connections. She snubs one of the mercenary captains, but seems to make headway with some of the unaffiliated youths. And we get this beat of she's thinking through the situation and thinks a feeling like falling. "Join me now," she said. "You'll be in a good position when I rise at the top."
Yeah, I really love the word usage here. The dichotomy between falling and being on the top. She's in this moment. She has her power flares and it scares people, and she's like, "Oh God, I'm gonna lose it all. I'm gonna lose it here. I'm gonna fall." And then she immediately talks about going to the top. And I love it, like this idea that she's constantly falling. Like she's like in any moment she could fall. And the only way to keep moving forward in her mind is to just constantly be climbing, constantly be reaching upwards, just keep swimming. Mm-hmm. And the thing that strikes me about this and all the Boston Games stuff actually is just how worm it feels. And I think that's intentional. We've jumped back into this pre-Gold Morning. We've jumped back into the worm timeline almost. And we've kind of latched on to this tone of advancement and escalation and go, 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 go. And I think that's very intentional. And I think what this arc does more than anything to me by its conclusion is really segment and divide the difference between the tone and the difference between the themes of Worm and Ward. Yeah.
It's almost like Ashley's past was, the themes of the Ward story, which led to her grisly death. And now that she's been resurrected and given a second chance, and maybe even more than a second chance, she has to grapple with how to grow from that, and that's why I love Ward so much. Mm-hmm. So then we match cut through the abstract query of how she's going to manage a difficult problem, I guess, to Riley asking her a similar question. It takes us a few moments to realize that she's talking to Riley, aka Bonesaw, for people who are less up on things, as the medical tinker works on her hands closer to the present day, but not quite caught up. because obviously Bonesaw is already sucked into the something. And it says, a thin plastic sheet was draped across her lap now, with blood settling into the creases. Her arms were short, ending in stumps of raw flesh at the ends. Instead of bones in the forearm, there were metal tubes extending a few inches past the flesh. Don't move the arms too much, you'll bleed more, and they get weird if I ask for too much blood. Oh, I have an idea.
One of the things that never occurred to me, Matt, and I don't know why this never occurred to me, because we knew it was Riley that was like building Ashley's hands, but I forgot that. I mean, I guess I knew, I just never connected the dots. This is the same person that made her into the monster that is now trying to make her back into some semblance of a human being. And we're going to see that scene before the end of this arc, but I think it's just so strikingly poetic that it's been the same person to do these two different things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very complex relationship. It was the person who seduced her into the situation in the first place, then this person who resurrected her, and now the person who is, and of course, Bonesaw has had her own character shifts over that time frame. So after Ashley asks why the ends of her metal arm stabby things are so sharp, Riley admits that she made the ends sharp to be used as weapons and says old habits die hard. And Ashley responds proportionately by trying to silently stab Riley in the neck.
I think it's really important that we see Ashley has absolutely no desire for her hands to be weapons there. Like, obviously they are weapons. It's what her power comes through. But outside of that, the idea of metal attachments being sharp and being used as weapons is something she doesn't accept. And I love what she says here. I'm not your weapon. You're a weapon. We all are. I'm a weapon, but I belong to me. My triumphs are my own. My triumphs are my own. I like that. It's such an Ashley thing to say. And I think implicitly that means my failures are my own as well. For all Ashley's flaws, she has a sense of responsibility and ownership for her actions, whether they're positive or negative.
Yeah. And this has highlighted for me something. It's just an interesting parallelism that at this point in time anyway, Ashley had sharp stabby things hidden inside her robot arms, which is exactly like what Rain did to his robot arms.
Yeah.
Of course,
interesting.
Ashley never used hers. It's just there's a lot of interesting like play there in the whole like Rain is an arms tinker thing that I couldn't help but think about a lot, but we didn't really go there in this chapter too much, or in this arc.
And you have to wonder what would have happened. Ashley's arm gets damaged in that fight. Would she have, if that sharp blade was still in there, would she have ended up using it?
Right, yeah.
I don't know.
And then there's this bit that I kind of want to freak out about for a while, where Ashley says, we're not friends. Give me working hands and powers, and maybe we can get there. That won't be soon. And like on the one hand, it's like, yeah, she's being, all hard ass about everything. But on the other hand, the phrasing of that is, maybe someday we could be friends. It's conceivable to Ashley that someday that she and Bonesaw could be friends. And I think that says a lot about her and about her relationship with absolution and forgiveness and all this stuff we've been talking about, that it's actually on the table that she would be friends with this person.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is so huge. And the thing that I love the most about this is how Ashley's situation and Ashley's approach to this thing is so distinct from Rain's whole deal. Like, we're exploring these ideas of recovery and absolution and forgiveness, but we're not like hitting the same beats, but with different characters. Like, each new character we dive in deep to is exploring like a different facet of this. Like, Rain did this horrible thing and he sought out forgiveness. He wanted redemption. Ashley became a horrible thing and she doesn't really want forgiveness. She doesn't think she deserves forgiveness. Redemption is almost meaningless to her. She just wants a tomorrow that's better than today. And I think that's what keeps this story moving. Like, we're not just circling around to the same beat. Like, it's very easy to say this story is about redemption and then just exploring redemption over and over again. We're exploring it from different angles, from different perspectives, from different facets. And I think it's going to be really cool to see how we do that as we move through each of the characters on this team. Ultimately, assumingly getting to our main character, Victoria. But it's so great.
Yeah, definitely. Like Ashley and Rain are on completely different trajectories and have completely different concerns. And there's not even, in fact, like I almost kind of did a mental double take where I was like, well, yeah, in a sense, they're on similar journeys, but not really.
Well, I mean, they could have. I mean, the hope is that they have a similar endpoint, which is recovery, right? But they're going to take completely different ways to get there because they want what they want out of the idea of recovery is unique to themselves. And I think we're going to see that through each and every one of these characters. Yeah.
They each have their own individual complex problems that are wholly theirs.
Yeah. The other part we learn here is that Ashley has retained the memories of Bonesaw's failed experiments with her. She remembers the tea party they had and the thing that happened after the tea party. Gets to relive all that stuff. That's fun.
Yeah, that's not something I expected to happen when we saw that tea party back in Worm.
No, definitely not. And I wonder, like, I think in this moment you're almost maybe supposed to think maybe it was Riley that did this, like Bonesaw and her fucked upness put these memories back into her head. I think we learn a little bit later that it's not necessarily true, but it's like at the moment I'm like, man, fuck you, Bonesaw, Jesus.
Yeah, at this point in the story, you're not sure what's going on, but I think by the end of the arc, you have at least some theories.
Yeah.
So now Amy shows up to check Riley's work, and before anything really comes of that, we cut back to Boston. Ashley walks into traffic and blows apart an 18-wheeler, creating a disturbance for apparently the sole purpose of kicking the ant's nest. She then fends off some sold-out capes, making her escape.
I like in these moments we learn a little bit more about how Ashley's power works. That she's learned certain patterns and routines and gestures that produce similar effects, but no gesture ever works the same way twice. And I think it's this wonderful metaphor, like anything with Ashley's hands, it's a wonderful metaphor for her as a whole, that she's this person who spent a long time alone trying to figure herself out. She generally understands how to get through the day, how to lessen her risk as much as possible. But it's like trying to wrangle a panicked animal. You're never sure what thing you do is going to set it off. And that's kind of how she has to live her life. That's sad.
Yeah, well said. So as she's evading Soldat, Edict catches her using her compulsion to keep her in place.
I love this. I love how immediate and visceral her reaction to Edict is, because we know through the bits of Edict's chapter that we saw that they don't really consider Damsel a threat, just a person that needs to be checked on occasionally and like pushed and shoved away from trouble. But Ashley responds to her as if she's her biggest nemesis, like that this is the person that I can't stand the most. And it's because Edict represents something to her that she can't admit. She represents weakness, and more specifically, control. Edict and Licit have basically been able to control and limit Damsel. And I think actually when we learn both of their powers, they kind of tie perfectly into this idea of limiting and control and boxing in. She's failed around them, right? Like she was running around for 3 years in their city, and they basically, with one or two exceptions, kept her mostly out of trouble. And she's never been able to like climb in that place. And so she's left, she's here to try something new, to succeed on a level that's higher than she ever has before. And here these old people come, and they're here to drag her back down to mediocrity, to drag her back down to meaninglessness.
Right, yeah. I mean, for them, like what they are to her is worse than being like people who are trying to kill her. They're people who infantilize her and talk down to her and treat her as if she's not dangerous, and make her feel weak, and she hates that more than, you know, she would hate being defeated by a strong opponent, I suspect. Right. So some of her new unpowered cronies show up to back her up. It's Bar, Jay, and Angel, characters who will stick around pretty much from this point on.
Yeah, and I like that this is like every other time she's encountered Edict before in her hometown. This is kind of probably the part where it all falls apart for her. But this is different. She's got people this time. She's a loner usually. She rarely works with other people. But as much as she scoffs about how she should be alone, that she's stronger than others, she is a lone wolf. She is stronger with other people too, and she uses their strength here to escape from this moment.
Yeah, good point. And she doesn't really acknowledge that.
No.
So then she disobeys Edict's order, causing pain and partial loss of vision in one eye. So it's a cool example of how Edict has like a compulsion power, which we've seen a few examples of that now. But the twist is that you can disobey it. It just costs you something.
Yeah, it's great. And I think the smart thing to do here would be to frame Edict and Lisset as kind of parental figures for Ashley. And I think when you do that, everything kind of slots in very nicely because they give her independence. They try to let her find her own way, but they're always there to like swoop in if like, oh, you've gone too far this time, and they kind of pull her back before she gets into too much trouble, or at least they try to. And if we look at them as parental figures in this way, Edict's power is like the literal equivalent of your mom saying, "You don't have to listen to me, but if you don't, there will be consequences." And I think it's with that image in mind, I love it so much.
Yeah, and Lisset is like the physical manifestation of boundaries.
Exactly.
That's wonderful. Thanks for pointing that out. All right, chapter X.4. In Boston, later on, Damsel wakes up thinking about how sleep always carries a risk of resetting her mind or her power in an undesirable way.
Sure keep getting a lot of beats about sleep and dreams in this book, huh, Matt?
Mm-hmm.
Wonder if there's something to this.
I don't know. So she looks around, eyeing some of the blast germ capes in the vicinity, who later turn out to be Blasto creations. Jay shows up to her meeting with her with some sandwiches, and she begins to grudgingly respect him. He overtly subordinates himself to her and calls her ma'am, which she likes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he certainly got like her ideal minion image pegged to a T here. It's like almost as if he's wait, never mind.
Oh,
I love so in this beat though we get this idea of food and how much she doesn't like food. So we've opened chapter 4 talking about how much she hates sleeping and she hates eating because they're such a threat to her. They're such a risk to her. And these are two things that like basically every single human being has to do. Like everyone, like the universals of mankind is we gotta sleep and we gotta eat. And to her, those basic human things are risky and almost not worth the risk. I love what she says, like, eating in front of people is a roll of the dice, and a loss meant embarrassment, a win meant normal. And it's so tragic that these two things that like are just part of being a living creature are so dangerous to her.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's that's part of the stuff that she's almost like trying to look away from in her mind, just it's like a constant sore spot, and she hates it when it's brought up to her, as we pointed out before. So there's this moment where someone compliments her name, and she kind of criticizes that. She says, "Clockwork dogs, why not cogs of war?" And Barr says, "They have names that mean peace and cooperation." And I just love this, repartee. That's all I have to say about that.
You burnt, Ashley.
Yep.
I mean, and I wonder, and maybe this is me reading too much into it, there's a chance here that Ashley just doesn't know what accord and détente mean. Like, she's not an educated person, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, she sees this and immediately says, why would you not have a name that encourages violence and power and the conquering nature? And it's like, the response is, well, it's because they want to do it through another way. Look at their names. And she doesn't know what those words mean.
Right.
Unless she watched a documentary that defined what détente meant. She doesn't really understand.
Yeah, right. Which, I mean, I think the ultimate irony is that Accord is a bloodthirsty person, but at least as long as you're not cooperating with him, he is.
Sure. Yeah.
So she talks over the powers and situations of the other villain groups in the city. Bar continually rubs Damsel the wrong way, and she repeatedly thinks of making an example of him, with apparent sincerity, like in her inner monologue. But if I'm not mistaken, she's never actually harmed anyone with her power since her trigger event, right?
Yeah, as far as we know, yeah, you're right. Which is a really interesting wrinkle in this whole thing. I was thinking back, we only saw Damsel in Worm as the Slaughterhouse 9 member. So I always kind of assumed that she just like regularly used her power on people, and the blasting her power to move around the battlefield in cool ways was like a reinvention of post Gold Morning Ashley as an attempt to like use her power in heroic, non-destructive ways. But no, we see that was how she used her power from the beginning. That's just how she used it at first, and eventually it was she was pushed across the line to start using it on people. And that is a really interesting thing, and I think it kind of ties into maybe why her shard is such an asshole to her, because it probably would, like, her shard is almost a contradiction, right? Like it feeds her with this lust for power and advancement, but at the same time it revels in chaos, which are two things that, like, advancing and chaos are two things that don't really work well together, as we kind of see in herself when she kind of implodes this whole thing at the end of it. And I wonder if it's like the constant wrestling with the idea that you're using your power to like ninja around the battlefield. Why don't you like fucking blow up a human? Mm-hmm. Do that.
Yeah, I think in Worm, actually, when Dragon and Defiant are hunting the 9, there's actually a mention of like Dragon knows everything, so she knows who Damsel of Distress is, and even in that scene, she mentions her in kind of a pitying way, as like someone who might be vulnerable, like a young girl living alone who might be vulnerable, or something along those lines. And it's just kind of interesting that perspective on who Damsel of Distress is was actually present even back then.
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, like Dragon wouldn't have that perspective if she were the kind of person who tore off limbs regularly.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So
sure.
at this point, Jay gives her practical advice, and when she asks why he's here, he insists that he's in it for the money.
Sure, Jan.
And she thinks about how the chaos is like fuel for her particular skill set.
Yeah, that's the thing we were just talking about. Chaos fuels her, and then I think that's true. But chaos annihilates everything, not just like the things you want it to.
Yeah.
Like Ashley is fueled by that chaos, but she wants to control and direct it, and it doesn't. Chaos doesn't really work like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, not to make too many Taylor comparisons, but it's like if Taylor didn't have any degree of like self-control or leadership abilities, basically, but still had the just like relentless need to push things, it would kind of end up like this, I think.
Yeah.
But this is, I mean, Ashley's worse than Taylor. You know how much I like to be unfair to Taylor, but
oh yeah, it's like our job.
Yeah, but Ashley is definitely like just explicitly doesn't have the basic skill set needed to be a warlord, like, ever. She just doesn't have the tools. So
on the other hand, Ashley never shot a baby in the head. Well, I get so many angry comments. It's gonna be like so many actuallys. It's coming.
Yeah, definitely. Can't wait. So she thinks to herself, she's kind of like talking through the situation and asking herself, like, that she was doing this with no other powers on her side against so many enemies. Not a concern, she told herself, a cold sort of excitement setting up shop in her chest as she worked to banish the doubts. Not a concern. Everything has been preparation for this. Even the fact that I've been completely alone for 3 years.
Ah, man, I love how Wildbow makes the truth behind all this posturing and performance kind of leak through. And it's not like it's a very like sly way, right? Like, Ashley's terrified here. Just like we saw back in chapter 7.4 when she's pretending that prison's going to go perfect and she's totally calm and fine with it, and Victoria sees right through it. She's scared, and that fear is leaking through, and all she can do with it is explain it away. All she can do is channel it into success, and channel the fear she has and the doubt she has and the misery she has for her life into it was preparation for this. If this succeeds, all that other stuff will be worth it. All that other stuff I've gone through will be worth it. But that's only if she succeeds, right? She's kind of literally putting all her eggs in one basket here.
Yeah, right. It's like she's deferring to tomorrow constantly, and just hoping that like the next thing will be the thing that kind of pays off.
Yeah,
you know.
I just said literally putting all her eggs in one basket. She's not actually putting any eggs in any baskets.
You forget about the egg scene that's coming up?
Yeah, that's
right.
It's the egg scene.
Yeah, I mean, we did learn about Victoria's relationship with eggs. Anyway, so we cut to a recess from Ashley's pre-trial hearing, and it apparently hasn't been going well, which agitates the others more than it does Ashley. Or maybe it'd be more precise to say that she's agitated, but she knows well enough to just not like get into it and ask them to stop talking about it. She's at this point, in the present day, she's aware of what will set her off, and she just steers away from it, which is a complete contrast to the Ashley that we just left.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that is a really stark comparison, especially if you put these two scenes in direct contrast, right? Moments before, Ashley is thinking to herself about the fact that she's fueled by chaos and she welcomes that fuel. This Ashley acknowledges that she's fueled by chaos and says, I don't want that.
Yeah.
And this is the part where you start to kind of see a hole in her whole coin flip philosophy. Like, I'm sure Ashley would probably justify this away as, oh, well, this time I flipped the coin and the answer that didn't escalate things came up. Good, lucky for me. But it's like, no, Ashley, I think you got to give yourself a little more credit in the fact that you are different, that you are much more aware and much more in control of yourself than that.
Yeah, I mean, you get a sufficient degree of self-awareness on a problem like that, and it can just kind of stop being a problem.
Right.
Realize I'm being vague here, but like that's kind of how the mind works. Like, just self-awareness is a superpower.
Yeah. Well, it's like to further the coin flip metaphor, you only have to flip a coin when you need to decide between two outcomes. And if you've already recognized that outcome B is not something that you want, then maybe there's no decision making there, so there's no coin flipping.
Yeah, good point. Exactly. So Kinsey at this point drops that she's been making a camera that takes pictures of the past. Cool. Great. And apparently she ripped off the speedrunners to accomplish this.
Yeah, and it's only 25 pounds and she's going to get it smaller.
Yeah.
That's just it's a fun joke. Book. I'm just scared now.
Yeah.
It's really scary.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine, like, Kinsey can't help but look at and study and dive into things. Can you imagine with a past camera?
Yeah. No, I don't even have to actually catch the thing that happened. I can just know that something happened and come look back in time at it.
Dear God.
Yeah. Then Victoria does this without even saying anything. She just walks up. Victoria took the empty space on the bench beside Ashley. She showed her phone. It was a picture of Presley, hair dyed in an inconsistent color that was more gray-white than pure white. The freckles reminded her of Amy, which would have been a tricky topic to raise. It reminded her of Jay, a memory from a past life, trickier still to bring up or raise.
Oh my God. Let's talk about this forever.
Yeah.
So Presley has become a much more important player in this whole thing than I ever thought she would when we were sitting there talking about that train scene. And Victoria brings her up like anytime she thinks Ashley needs to some encouragement. Like, look, this is a person that looks up to you. This is a person that respects you. And she does. And Ashley appreciates that on some level. But there's something that Victoria doesn't know. She doesn't know about Jay, and how Presley reminds her of Jay, this person that we'll see is not necessarily a great memory. And I like that we're connecting Presley to Amy and Jay, these two people from both of these characters' pasts who they have difficulty remembering and thinking about, and are not people that we would say they draw strength from. And Victoria is not aware of this at all, but I think it connects them in a way.
Yeah. Very interesting. I somehow, I don't know how I just noticed this fact, but the fact that the freckles remind her of Amy, the freckles reminded Victoria of Amy too.
Yep.
Back in the train scene.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually kind of what was freaking her out about it, and she was having some trouble getting a handle on it. I also want to draw attention to the language of, it reminded her of Jay, a memory from a past life. And I don't mean to be too literal, but this is a bit of an indication that Ashley may actually view that as not her, you know, like at some level of detachment from that memory. It's not Jay, the guy who she had this complicated relationship. It's Jay, a memory from a past life, you know?
Yeah. That's
there's
true.
There's a distance there.
Yeah. I mean, that is a phrase that in every other story would be not be used literally. It would be, that was before I changed my past life. This is literally her past life. This was a life that is an entirely different life in the past.
Yeah, I don't know how much it just raises this question of how much does she identify with these memories, and I mean, some of them are literally not hers, so it's an open question.
That is true. Yeah.
So we cut to Jay driving Ashley around as she topples buildings in Blastgerm's territory, then invades their headquarters. She digs her way down to Blasto's laboratory and skirmishes with Rotten Apple. She realizes that the Blastgerm allied capes are actually just homunculi.
I love her reaction to this, because the first thing she does when she realizes that is says, they cheated. It's still kind of just a game to her, right? I'm having such a difficult time recruiting people. Recruiting people is central to my strategy to win. They just faked it. They didn't recruit anyone. They just grew them. They cheated. It's not fair. And I think that's such an interesting look into Ashley's whole psyche throughout this whole thing. They cheated.
Yeah, I love that too. She accidentally kills one of the kind of growing vat creatures, and she's kind of like inwardly, secretly relieved that it wasn't an actual person. She makes a deal with Rotten Apple to take some of their money in exchange for letting her keep Deathchester, and her not telling the others that their capes are fake.
Yeah, so all in all, though, a win. They won. They had this plan, they executed it, and they won. I do love the beat about her accidentally killing him, killing the homunculus, because she plays it off immediately as if she meant to do it, right? She's like walking up to the tank, and her power goes off, and it's dead, and she like plays it off as, yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
And just live it on the edge constantly.
Yeah. I love how the power is portrayed like visually as like lancing out and like almost strategically killing this thing. Like it's times like that you kind of feel like it has a mind of its own and it's going out of its way to do things like this.
Yeah.
So later, Damsel sits with her recruits who are enjoying some downtime doing a who would win Arms Master versus Bastion argument. And I'm going to call back to this later, but I want to just drop it now that Ashley says Arms Master has discipline. He has more tools. But then, of course, she removes herself from this celebratory environment, effectively overwhelmed by the attention and appreciation. And then Jay joins her outside and puts the moves on her.
Yeah, you go, Jay. Putting Jay aside for a bit, I want to talk about this idea of the pressure of success on her. She's just had the most successful night of her cape career. Every other time she's tried this, every time she's planned this, she's failed. Something has gone wrong every single time. But not this time. She's recruited people. She planned an operation. It worked. They got a bunch of money. They kind of seized control of this territory. Blast Gem has been at least dealt with for now. her minions are now respecting her like never before. She almost describes it as if like a religious experience, like they're deifying her to a certain level. That's exactly what she wanted. But she can't be happy with that because, like she's always said before, this isn't a good day. This is the day that you dread, the bad day. And I think it's because at the end of the day, Ashley's chasing her wants, the success, respect, power. These are the things she wants, but they're not the things that she needs. And it's because underneath all this is just a scared, she's still just that scared 13-year-old girl waiting for that inevitable failure. And she says in this moment, it felt like everything she could do was the wrong thing, that every choice before her is the wrong choice no matter what. And oh man, it's starting to get dark, Matt.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, what she's getting here, exactly what she's been wanting, this kind of like adoration, and she can't handle it. It like freaks her out and she has to leave. And, you know, I mean, she doesn't have the self-awareness and kind of reflection to be like, well, then why am I on this path?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Success on this path makes me as miserable as failure on this path. Why am I doing this?
Yeah. I mean, we all do that to some degree, though. So.
Oh, sure. I'm not attacking her for it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that's very relatable is that we all have things like this where we, I mean, it's the human nature. It's the conflict between wanting what's bad for us and not having the wisdom to reflect on that. So we move on into X.5, and Damsel and her gang walk through a house that Jay has found and wants Damsel to rent as a headquarters. Angel and Var go swimming in the pool on the property. And I like this, Damsel's watching them out the window and thinking to herself, there was a side of her that wanted to snap at them, but Angel had done fine so far. If Angel was happy, Ashley could be happy for her. She had seen enough people of her age group while growing up and watching television to know that sometimes they acted this way. And it's just, Ashley's so damn complicated. Like you just said, she's this scared little girl, entirely educated by television, who nonetheless is dominated by these violent, paranoid, controlling impulses. And she wants personal connection and recognition, but getting any is overwhelming. And like the closest thing to like normal human thing here is her like she likes Angel as a person and is able to just like watch her swim and just be like, yeah, okay, I can appreciate that she's having a fun time and not mess it up for her. Yeah,
like we said last chapter, everything she could do was the wrong thing, and it's so hard to read here. And I think we have just crossed the halfway point of this arc. And Ashley has officially climbed as high as she's going to go. Here in this opening chapter, she admits that she's no longer in the zone, that zone we were talking about at the start of this. She's lost it. She's no longer in it. And the other side of her is coming out, the one that is not laser-focused, confident, and dangerous all at once. That part in the zone part is gone, and this is the start of her fall. And here we go. Here we go.
Yep. So she decides that she won't rent the building for now, and next, Jay shows her some clothes that he has bought for her. We begin to see how complex their relationship has become even at this relatively early point.
Yeah, it's really, really complicated. He's really slotted himself into that number 2 position. She'll call him a squire later on, but I see here that as much as Ashley tries to deny it, there's a reciprocated feeling there. Like Jay likes her and she reciprocates that feeling on some level, and that's only going to get stronger as we go.
Yeah. I think there's plenty of moments to talk about this, and I think we'll wait till a little bit later.
Sure.
So it appears that her gang has adopted a Clockwork Orange style of costuming, apparently. And I love this. You know, Scott, I once dressed as a droog for Halloween, but nobody got the reference. Imbeciles.
I'm just a little concerned that you watched or read Clockwork Orange and said, yes, this is what I want to be. It's really upsetting, Matt.
Well, I mean, it's Halloween, right? You're supposed to be scary.
Sure.
And also, I lied. My professor did recognize my costume.
Wait, you went to... Wait, this was as an adult?
Yes, of course.
Wait, what were you dressed up in a Halloween costume for? What are you
just
doing?
like a departmental Halloween party where I got to wear a jockstrap outside of my pants.
Sweet.
Yeah.
It's like Quail Man.
Wouldn't you? If you could get away with it?
Probably not.
Well, that's where we're different, Scott. So as they leave, one of the underlings makes a comment about Jay being Ashley's bitch, and this enrages Ashley quite severely. The gang has the good sense to look terrified, which calms her down.
Yeah, but we're seeing cracks in her persona here, right? I mean, I think that's what this whole beginning part of this chapter does, is kind of show as things start to fall apart. And I think it's not an accident that as her relationship with Jay is changing and possibly growing, everything else around her is falling apart. And she says it's right there. She can almost grasp it, but it's starting to slip through her fingers. And it's almost as if she's gonna like blame a person. Like if one thing is getting stronger while the other thing is collapsing, and maybe there's going to be some undue blame there, possibly.
I don't know. I guess we'll see if something like this is being set up. So we jump forward again, sort of match cutting through Angel smiling at her, to Angel punching Lady Photon in the face.
Yay.
Yay. I just wanted to take a moment because I forget things. And I assume people might like to be reminded of things as well. That
Sure.
Lady Photon is Crystal's mom, and she died in Gold Morning while being controlled by Taylor. So I kind of forgot several of those discrete facts and how they related to each other. And here's Ashley's friend Angel punching her in the face, and then Ashley proceeds to basically single-handedly fight the entirety of New Wave, including a standoff with Brandish.
Yay! We also get a couple people we've never really seen before. We get Lightstar and Floor. These are two members of New Wave. I don't think we've ever seen them in action. I think Lightstar is Uncle Mike, who we saw at the barbecue, right? I think. I should have confirmed that before I wrote that down. But Floor, for people that don't know, is an old member of New Wave who was killed in her civilian identity after New Wave unmasked themselves. And that caused Lightstar to say, fuck this place, I'm out. So, be happy to see these guys, but also sad that you know their future. And that's not good. There's a lot of depressing things in the future for everyone in the scene right now.
It's kind of impressive how much backstory, like weaving together, was accomplished throughout Eclipse without it ever feeling like fan servicey. You know what I mean? Like at no point did it even begin to feel that way. But I'm like, when you reflect on it, you're like, wow, we saw Blasto, we saw Accord, we saw New Wave, probably, other people. We saw the Slaughterhouse 9.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, just kind of noticing that in my brain right now.
Yeah.
So this delightful dialogue here. Damsel of distress, Brandish said. This thing, you and I talking, trying to find something profound to say, mutual therapy during the pause in the battlefield, we're not going to do that. Thinking aloud, Damsel said. That's always how it is. Sorry, but I had my fill of talking about my problems a long, long time ago, and I'm not going to talk about or shoulder yours.
Oh, Carol. This actually makes me like the Carol bit we get in 7.4 even more.
Mm-hmm.
As I think a couple people pointed out in last week's Reddit thread, one of the big distinctions between Carol we saw in that chapter and Carol we've seen in the rest of Ward so far is that she was wearing a costume. That was Brandish, not Carol, and Brandish seemed way better at this whole mothering thing than her civilian counterpart did. But then here in this chapter, we see Brandish as well. We see a past version of Brandish, a Brandish that completely dismisses any of Ashley's problems, that refuses to see the issues that might have been driving her to this person, that the idea of talking through your problems or shouldering people's problems is something that she's like, no, fuck that. This is a very, very different Carol.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just noticing that I think this long time verbiage has been used recurrently by Damsel, and I think maybe she got this from Brandish. I don't know. It's interesting. I can't prove that right now, but I did a quick Control F, and I think it does pop up a few times. Anyway, I agree with you. It's awesome to see this clear change in Brandish and Carol, and there's so much to dig into there. I think we'll get more chances in later arcs to do that, though. So we'll move on from here. So Ashley is bailed out by some of her hirelings, and she fires a parting shot at Brandish, who condenses into her durable sphere form, which probably saves her from death, if only by making her a smaller target.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. Just want to point out here that, once again, Ashley is saved by the people that she surrounded herself with for like the second time in the Boston games, where if she was truly alone, she probably would have this would have been it. Yeah, this is the first time I think we've seen Ashley reach out with the intent to kill someone, or not the intent, as she says, not the intent, the willingness to kill. And that's definitely crossing a line. And I think she's chasing that idea a little bit here, because after she crosses that line, she says she temporarily gets back into her zone again. She decides that the decision to try to kill Brandish was the right one. She says this was the right decision, and she gets rewarded for it. It says, the energy and restlessness she'd missed was back. It had been with her as she stepped off the bus. It had helped propel her forward, and as she made her initial moves in Boston, this was closer to the feeling she had on the bus, but it was a darker feeling. So it's almost as if she crosses that line. She decides that for the first time she's willing to take a life, and she's rewarded by her shard for it by a temporary trip back to that zone. But it's not the same thing. It's kind of like chasing a high, right? Like it's not the same as the first time it was. There's something different about it, something darker in this case. And I think that's going to lead her down this path that ends with, we'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I didn't make the explicit connection that it was this new willingness to kill that sort of gave her the shot in the arm. But I like that. So then we cut to Jay taking care of her wounds, and we understand even more of their relationship and his specific role. And like you said before, basically he's her squire, but he's also super aroused by being her squire. And they're both kind of getting different things out of this, but also maybe just like obverse faces of the same coin. And then there's maybe a second level to it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, because in this chapter we have two things. Like throughout this chapter, we've had two things. We've had Jay and her growing relationship, and we've had her growing struggle with the darkness and the zone and these kind of things, and building this power and putting forth this image. And I think in the end of this section, we have right before this, she decided that she was willing to kill someone if it meant continuing to go forward, and was rewarded with back in the zone, but a dark version of that. And then here she has Jay, the guy that's really into her, that person that is serving her, and then we'll see later that she refers to him as her hands, and his serving her and his helping her makes her feel more human than she had in a long time. And which, you're right, there's that long time beat. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but is literally what Carol just said to her. But it almost seems like these two parts of her are incongruous. Like there's the one side of her that is chasing this more dark, more monstrous, more destructive the shard side of her, and there's the other side that's being pulled kind of more human. It's being by Jay's assistance. Is feeling more human, feeling more like a person than she has ever. And I think this is kind of the push and pull of what's happening to Ashley in this moment. And something's going to break eventually. And I think that's kind of what the story is heading us towards.
Right. It's heading us toward Jay pulling her out of her terrible relationship with his shard and them running off together. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what you were. So, and here's the best match cut right here, where, like you just said, she's thinking of Jay and she thinks she had hands again. They just weren't her own. And then, of course, cuts to she rubbed her fingertips up and down the skirt portion of her dress, testing the sensations. The hands weren't new, but there were still times they didn't feel like hers, especially when her appointments with Riley concluded.
I completely agree. That's my favorite one too. I loved that. I was flabbergasted by that. Like how it handles the cut, how it thematically ties into, in both situations, they're not her hands.
Yeah.
But they are. It's so good.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even need to read the second sentence to understand, like, oh, that's great. We're getting, these are the fake hands and that's the thing. We're doing it. Yes. Win. Mm-hmm. So yeah, in the current timeline, she's meeting with some scientists who bring in Edict. And it becomes clear that the bit of Edict's POV in X.1 was actually something that Ashley was remembering, and that her shard is supplying her with Edict's memories.
Yeah, we've already talked about this for a bit, but I do think this reveal works really well and kind of works to recontextualize not just the scene with Edict, but how the whole chapter is working. We're starting to realize as we go through it that, these are all memories coming from her, and it doesn't matter whether they're her memories or not. And it kind of, as we said at the very beginning, forces us to think of the Ashley memories as maybe not memories in the traditional sense. Like you said, like if she's remembering things from Edict that aren't her memories, are the things she's remembering from this Ashley her memories, or are those that Ashley's memories, that other life that she lived?
Yeah, I mean, all kinds of interesting questions about identity here that I'm sure we'll be talking about forever.
Yep.
So moving on into X.6, Damsel on impulse uses her power to blast herself up the side of a building to get a look at the source of a rumble in a distance. She kind of chaotically, bounces up the face of this building, like constantly on the verge of falling. And then when she finally reaches the top, she sees an enormous 4-story monster wading into the water.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the writing that describes her ascent of this building is fantastic. The way it in this one action manages to convey her entire emotional state right now, that she's like desperately scrambling, desperately climbing upwards and doing it in the most reckless, haphazard way, where she's just like a couple times almost just falls and loses it all. It's so good. Like it's so funny. We encapsulate her entire mindset in just a climb to the top of a building.
Yeah, and then when she puts it in context later, she's like, she couldn't quite remember the thought process that had led to her deciding to do that, which is exactly how she does everything.
Exactly, yeah.
So I love the monster. The spotlight of the helicopter illuminated the source of the rumbling a ways off to the north past the water. It was taller than some 4-story buildings, hunchbacked, without much of a head. It walked on 2 legs, using one of its arms when its balance failed and it tipped too far forward. Its other arm wasn't the kind that supported weight, consisting of a morass of tentacles. I don't know, I just was so like, I was like smiling reading the giant monster on the scene.
Yeah, it's great. And also everyone's reaction to it when she climbs back down. She's like, what is it? It's a giant monster. Yeah. Giant monster? Don't worry about it. Wait. Giant monster.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Yes.
I think one of the low-key great things about this arc is, as the relationship between Ashley and her minions improves, how the dialogue and the interplay between them improves to match it. Yeah,
that's one thing, like, that she will say her typical damselish things to them, and they'll sort of like smile, not condescendingly, but like they get they're on the wavelength.
Yeah.
Like they're not scared of her, but neither are they. Are they looking down at her? And I think that's a fun. It's fun that things develop that way, at least for a while before they, collapse.
Yep.
So below, her group plus the mercenary Marrow raid a warehouse of electronics. Jay has some ideas regarding how to sell the stolen goods.
Yeah, interesting that she's now using Marrow, even though she consciously decided not to go with him earlier on in the arc. Now maybe she's getting a little desperate. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe so.
I do like the beat where it appears that Jay has plans on how to offload these goods, which makes you kind of believe that this entire plan was his, which I think is a way to kind of show how her respect for him is growing, that she's letting him call shots and things and maybe come up with plans.
Yeah, and it makes sense because he says at one point he's a little bit streetwise, and she is certainly, I don't want to say she's not streetwise because she's been living on the streets for years, but she's not streetwise in the same way as she's not Underworld streetwise.
Let's just say she's not streetwise. Come on.
She's able to take care of herself, kind of.
Bare minimum.
Right.
Take care of herself.
Yeah. So at this point, Jay mentions that his heart is racing, and there's so much in this exchange here.
Yeah.
Isn't yours? He asked. How are you calm at a time like this? I'm not, I suppose, she said. She wasn't calm, but it made her uncomfortable to try to explore that simple question of how she felt or where her normal was. There were times her heart raced, and her heart was racing now, but that wasn't unusual. It was almost normal. Whenever it wasn't like this, she couldn't say she was calm. If she wasn't actively doing something, then she generally had other concerns. It was a rare time that she was still, things were mundane, and she found a moment to consider how she felt or how her body was doing. She moved her hand with care because an incautious movement could destroy the car door, wheel, or engine. She didn't recognize her own hand. For the last little while, she had been eating more, thanks to Jay. Her fingers were still thin, but the bones and the tendons at the back weren't quite as defined as they had been. And then shortly, just a couple sentences later, she says something about the monster, not to worry about it, not as long as he keeps it out of Deathchester. And Jay says, half the city must be shitting itself right now. Because they're weak, she said. So that's another one of those beats. There's every sentence in this, I could pull something out, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost too much to find a way to frame a conversation around it, right? But the idea of normal to her is not what normal is to everyone else. And she's so theatrical, she's so performative that even when she's not calm, she looks calm. And how kind of tragic that is. It was a rare time that she was still, things were mundane, and she found a moment to consider how she felt or how her body was doing. That's such a tragic, he basically says, how are you calm right now? And she's, I'm not. And then she goes introspective for a bit and says so what this is kind of saying is Jay provides her that ability to consider how she was feeling and how her body was doing. And in that moment, she looks at her hand and realizes that I don't recognize this hand. This doesn't look like my hand anymore. And we have to go back to her hand imagery again, that Jay is changing her and her hand is changing as in response to that. And it's such again, we talked about this at the beginning, but this is such a wonderful, clear imagery to negotiate the changing in Ashley throughout the course of the story.
Yeah, I think part of the crisis that's building here is Jay is providing her with the space to actually reflect for the first time in her life almost, and she's not at all in a mental place where that's actually going to be a good thing for her.
Right.
It's in a sense it's almost traumatic for her to be forced to reflect on herself when she's not ready for it.
Yeah. It's almost as we talked about the how her wants versus her needs. I think Jay is providing her need before she's in a position to realize that it is indeed her need.
Yeah, and it's painful.
Yeah.
So she's going to reject it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, we could go into that even more, but I think we'll just have to move on. So Licit shows up and he stops her convoy. She gets out and distracts him, enabling a few of her trucks to get away. And then she threatens him with dismemberment, and he seems like so completely not bothered, and says, kind of confirms for us, you've never hurt anyone that badly, damsel. It's a great angle on her character, again, seeing how dismissive these heroes are, these guys who actually know her.
Yeah, and again, going back to that mother-father dynamic we established with Edict, Licit is the other side of that, right? Like you said, the shields are literally boxing her in and shielding her from bad decisions. And it's very much like a parent would never look at their kid and think that they're capable of doing really terrible things. It's like, if I can just push you, if I can just help you in places that you need it, you're not going to do all these things. And man, I'd love the complex relationship between these three so much.
Yeah, me too. Speaking of which, Damsel's saying, if you are lying, how about I put you down? I might not have maimed anyone, you're right about that, but I've killed people, I know, Ashley, he said. I'm sorry that happened. Her expression twitched, irritation, anger. Her voice was hard. What did I say about my name? I wasn't saying it to you, he said in a quiet voice. I was saying it to her. Is that okay?
Man, that's like the first time anyone has out loud established a difference between Ashley and Damsel. And that's crazy.
Yeah. It's I mean, it's another example of them basically trying to parent, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. It's like if your kid decides, I'm going to call myself Laser tomorrow, and be like, okay, that's fine, but I'm not talking to Laser right now. I'm talking to Matt.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I also like this. Her expression twitched, irritation, anger. I don't buy that it's just irritation and anger. It's pain at being reminded of what happened. And yeah, there probably is irritation and anger because she's sort of grown a callus over that particular trauma, but the irritation and anger occurs because the callus is being poked.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is about this time on my reread in preparation for the podcast that I had this thought about how putting Ashley back in with criminals and having her resume the damsel name was such a stupid fucking idea, Misfit Toys. This is so dumb. We're because in this scene we're pointing out the difference between Ashley and Damsel and kind of uniquely identifying these people, and then to say, okay, Ashley, you're recovering, but here, go pretend to be that person for a while. That was really dumb, Matt. Yeah, that was really dumb.
Yeah, go.
And I'm not blaming Victoria or the rest of the toys. Ashley absolutely wanted to do it, but the more we learn about Ashley, I think the more we see that was just a completely wrong-headed plan for the whole group. It was a bad call.
Yeah. I don't even know if it was a call so much as just something that happened. But yeah, it was a bad thing. Yeah. So Licit convinces Ashley that she's not really a priority here, which of course she doesn't like that. She doesn't like to hear that either. It's just that her robbery was inconveniently timed to coincide with the arrival of the giant monster. And he tells her that he has a sense of who she could be, which is the first time anyone's really told her anything like that in her life, I'm pretty sure, except maybe her mom. And he gives her a phone to get in contact with Director Armstrong, which she then annihilates.
This is so parental. The more I look at this in the eye in a parental point of view, the more I see that's exactly what this relationship is, because this idea that you're not really even the priority here. The idea that a parent is trying to make you feel better in a certain way, but is not aware enough to understand what you're going through to say that you saying that is exactly the opposite of the thing they want to hear. I mean, that's such a parent disconnect with their teenage kid thing.
Yeah.
But then also this idea of, I see the potential in you. I know what you could be, and I want to help you get there. I can't force you to do it. You're a young adult now. You have to make those decisions yourself, but I will do everything I can to lead you to that moment. And I think the most important thing we're seeing here for setting up the rest of the events of the chapter or the arc rather is that as she's being pushed into a corner, she's getting more and more paranoid. She's starting to, like, everyone's out to get her. Like, everyone's lying to her. Anything someone says, if someone says something remotely positive or nice to her, they are trying to trick her. They are lying to her. I can't trust anyone. She's convinced here that Lisset is out to get her, even though he's shown like absolutely no desire to do so. Like, nothing in what we understand of the relationship between the heroes and the capes or the heroes and the villains of, is it Stafford? Is that the name of the town she's from? Nothing about their relationship in the past has shown that he's like out to trick her and get her. But she can't. She's like lashing out as she's pushed into the wall.
Yeah, I mean, I think her success has actually made her feel even more precarious. It's like the metaphor of climbing the side of the building. It's not even that she's like she's basically as close to winning as she ever gets in this whole arc here, and yet this is the peak of her paranoia, more or less, because she's closest to the top, and thus the fall is the furthest.
Yeah, especially when you are convinced that you are going to fall, and that is what she is. She is, again, we have to go back to, we have the bad days and the days you're terrified of the bad days. She thinks, I will fall. The higher you go, the worse that fall is going to be.
Yeah. So yeah, we now cut back to Riley's lab, where she's asking Riley if she can do anything to allow her to put nail polish on her fingernails. And I knew this was going to happen.
Yay.
Riley asks if they could have tea in exchange, and Ashley doesn't say no. But then when Riley leaves the room, Amy asks, she starts to ask about Victoria, and Ashley coldly shuts her down.
Man, so as a person who wrote about the nail polish scene for a page, I'm really happy that we've kind of circled back to it here.
Yeah.
But again, we go back to the image of the hands, right? And we have, like, in the last time we saw them, she had just gotten these new hands and distinctly noted that they didn't feel like hers. And here, she's kind of taking ownership of them. She wants to decorate them, costume them, transform this thing that is a source of difficulty to her into something not only beautiful, but distinctly hers. And I love that idea so much.
Yeah, and she never could have worn nail polish even when she had her own hands. So
right.
This is a strict upgrade, actually.
Yeah, I love it.
So
and
back in the...
I do love that. Sorry. Yeah. I do love that really quick scene between Amy and Ashley, where Amy kind of tries to pry a little bit at Victoria, and Ashley immediately shuts her down. I love that respect between Ashley and Victoria, that kind of unspoken respect here, that I know Victoria would not be comfortable with me divulging information about her, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, it's a defensiveness almost, yeah. Back in the past, she's now sleeping in the same bed as Jay, although they both appear to be like clothed. But anyway, she heads with her gang to the villain Moot, where she takes her place at the fireside for the first time.
And Matt, the writing as we approach the end of this chapter is so meanly peaceful, like especially knowing what's going to happen after this. Yeah. We're riding on a roller coaster right now, and we're heading to the top, and we know the drop is coming, but before the drop is coming, we have these moments of this back and forth banter between her and her minions, and this general bonding between them. I mean, look at this scene between Ashley and Angel. Stop being so happy, Ashley told her. There's only so much to go around. There's more to go around than there was a week ago, Angel said. Barr elbowed her. Yeah, maybe there is, Ashley said. You're just like, fuck. They're like, so they're like, we've seen, so now we've got definitive confirmation that Ashley and Jay's relationship has moved to the next level. I don't, like, logistically, I don't know how that works for like the danger of the hands going off, but never mind that. there's like these beautiful moments between all these characters, and it's about to all come crashing down, and it's, especially when you're reading it a second time, it just makes it all the more devastating.
Yeah. I think, we've been foreshadowed that something terrible is going to happen to Jay.
Yeah.
From almost when we met him. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and the chapter ends with her heart racing again. We just talked about how her heart was racing back in the thing, and what that means, what her heart racing means to her mood. But this is everything. This is the culmination. She's gonna take her place at the fireside and step into the light and be one of these people. And I don't think it's gonna go well.
No, I don't think so. So let's watch that. Let's watch that happen. X.7 and the Clockwork Dogs make a really big play. They bring in a large number of allies. These new groups arrive, and we get a detailed description of them. The unmasked are the creepy ones with the self-harm theme, and Linig4 on the subreddit points out that their leader has a description fairly close to that of one of Clastigüeñe's shades.
Gross.
Yeah.
I don't like any of these people.
Well, don't worry, he's dead. So.
Well, the unmasked wear masks, Matt. What the hell's up with that?
I know. It must.
Your branding sucks, unmasked.
Drives me crazy. So as the more powerful groups arrive and carve up Boston, Damsel realizes she's being cut out, and she starts to try to throw her weight around. A cord cuts her down with some cruelty, and she begins to rant at him, and then somebody just kind of unceremoniously teleports her away from the fireside.
And there it is. Everything she's done, all of her goals to get recognition, to be in the center circle, to be respected and appreciated, it's all gone. It was for nothing. She was cut out, removed, discarded. Here comes the bad part.
And it's not even like she lost a fight. She just was dismissed like a child.
Yeah.
And
Ashley could handle losing in a knockout, like drag out fight. But yeah, this is the worst way to dismiss her.
Yeah, right. So back in the present, in the hearing, Victoria speaks passionately on Ashley's behalf at her hearing. And Ashley is very irritated that Victoria seems to be rejecting her gift of the apartment. But it seems to me like a transient emotion. She doesn't really think Victoria's an idiot. She ends the scene actually thinking about how Victoria understands the importance of theater and how they're similar in that way.
Yeah, I really liked getting to see Victoria from someone else's angle and perspective here. The poise, the control, the power she commands with her presence and her words makes you kind of wonder if she turned on her emotional aura a little bit here, just for a little extra oomph.
Yeah, that's
as she pleads with the court.
I feel like she wouldn't have, but I think that's a fun idea.
Yeah, I don't think she would have either, but it's probably pretty tempting.
Yeah.
As far as the theater of it all, I think this is something that we haven't actually drawn much attention to during our analysis so far, but Ashley's love of image and theater are absolutely present throughout every single one of her beats in these chapters. It's the motivating factor for everything she does. Why get power? Why get money? Why search for respect? Because the image and the theater are all that matters in this world to her. Yeah. And all those things are only to serve that. I think I have to agree with Ashley's final assessment, though. And I think maybe the text wants us to, because she looks at Ashley and says, Victoria, and says, it was clear from the way Victoria held herself, how she made her arguments and picked her clothes. She understood the image and the theater too. She understood that without both of these things, they had nothing at all. I think Victoria would agree with the first part, that image and theater, especially as a cape, are important parts of your existence. But I don't know if Victoria would go as far as to say without those things, they would have nothing, that they would be nothing.
It's interesting, too, that in the next chapter, Jack basically contradicts that, too, and says, oh, no, there's so much more than just the theater.
Right.
So I'm trying to think if I can figure out how that relates, maybe I'll think of something by the time we get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I guarantee Victoria would say something to the effect of, they're tools that we use as capes because it's kind of necessary for us to use as capes. But I would never say the theater of it all would be the only thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So back in Boston, Ashley's pretty down about the fact that most of her underlings have deserted her after the moot.
Yeah, and here we get the first part of a structural framing device that will persist through the rest of the chapter. She counts her remaining underlings, 47 or 48 underlings, and we'll circle back to this as everything crashes around her in what I think is a beautiful moment to use that structural element.
Yeah. So at this moment, she takes Jay's phone and she calls Director Armstrong.
With her feet?
Yeah.
Foot dial.
And he tells her that Cauldron is backing Accord and Detente and that she can't possibly stand against them. And he tells her that Accord could take her out at any time and he's a mastermind manipulator and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And in this moment, he offers her a spot on the wards. This was implied from Lisset before, but this is the director of the PRT of Boston definitively saying, we will take you on our team. And she can't accept it, of course. And it's not because, and you got to think that on some level she wants it. On some level, that would be exactly what she wants. But doing that would admit that you need other people, and it would potentially risk those people. You could that's the constant kind of back and forth between Ashley, is the fact that she both destroys the people that she's around in her mind, inevitably will destroy them, but also need them. Mm-hmm. And she can't wrestle with those two things. So of course she could never be a ward.
Yeah. I also really like how Armstrong comes across here. I can't help but compare it to like Pigot in this scene would have like used, triangulated her position and tried to drop a bomb on her while this conversation was happening.
Yeah, probably.
So I think Ashley connects the dots wrong because anyway, Accord isn't a precog, but I feel like he lined up this shot so well that he might as well be one.
Yeah, I go back and forth on how much credit I want to give Accord for how things go down at the end of this chapter. I do think there's something to the idea that he saw Ashley as a chaotic element, but maybe thought, if I play this right, I could control that chaos in a way. That's kind of his modus operandi in general. He wants to bring order to chaos. So maybe he didn't know exactly what she would do, but he knew he could push her to something that would be beneficial to him.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't even know what Detente's power is. Like, there's all kinds of... I think it's too poetic that, basically he dismisses her in a way that guarantees that she wants to make a big splash in her exit. Yeah. Which only serves him, really. So... Yeah. Like you said, maybe he didn't know exactly what she would do, though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you might be right. I think that might be giving him too much credit. But then again... he is a badass.
Yeah. So she goes back inside, and apparently she's decided that Jay is a spy, a mole, and she kind of cracks, and she slowly kills him, tearing him apart piece by piece, and he gets in his final dig and says, "You will never another me, never this." And as she sadistically kills him, she then scours the hotel room and she keeps one souvenir of Twisted Metal from the scene.
I'm glad you didn't pull any more quotes from the scene than the one you just read, because it's rough. Yeah. This is really rough. I've seen a lot of talk on the subreddit and elsewhere about this idea of, was Jay a spy? No, I don't think so. There's nothing anywhere in the text that would imply that that is the way. And I think the scene works because in her rage and paranoia and chaos, she lashes out against the thing that is changing her. She felt something for Jay. Jay was changing her hands, remember? And she sees this change, maybe subconsciously, as part of the reason she failed. And like she did when she decided that she was willing to kill Brandish, she's searching to get back into that zone again. Attempting to kill Brandish did it for her. Jay is the reason she's failing, so perhaps killing him will do the same thing. And she does it. I don't think he was spying on her. I haven't seen anything in my examination of the text that even hints at that. Not that it's impossible, but the scene works so much better without that.
And this just feels very much like one of those, like, she takes an action that felt right at the time, but is obviously wrong in retrospect, like right. She's this isn't calculated. We don't see what we're seeing into her head, and we don't see the moment where she thinks this is all Jay. Jay is a spy. Jay's working for Accord. She just kind of goes inside, and things have their own momentum from there, you know?
Right.
I mean, like you could even imagine that it could have gone a different way. Like she takes his hand, he pulls away, he loses his hand. She didn't decide to do it. Yes, she did decide to grab his hand. You know, I'm not absolving her of what happened here. It's more like things get out of control so quickly with her that it's hard to even like trace the point at which this like started to go downhill.
You're absolutely right. I don't think she walked back into that hotel room saying, Jay's a spy, I'm going to kill him.
Yeah.
I think it just escalated to that point.
Yeah. And I think others have pointed out, like other members of her gang who are like more likely to be the spy, actually.
Yeah, I think that O'Brien guy, right, is a pretty popular.
Yeah. And that just makes sense fairly kind of straightforwardly.
If there even was one. I mean, with Cauldron as your backer, like, I don't know if you really need to infiltrate with a spy.
Yeah. Yeah, right. She's not that important, really. So she staggers away from the hotel and thinks of all the people who have sabotaged and abandoned her, or just abandoned her, I should say. And she sees Blasto's giant nearby. And again, kind of on the momentum of the moment, she flies toward it and she attacks it. She tears into it and through it and in and out of it until it loses the strength to hold itself together and it collapses.
Yeah. And this is where we start to get that countdown we were talking about. Mm-hmm. Ashley counting down the number of people loyal to her, the people that she has left. And this slowly goes as she's fighting and destroying this monster until she gets to one last person in her group, herself. She needed to reaffirm that faith to leave some impact. So we see here that I don't think she's killing this giant to impress anyone else anymore. It's still theater. It's always theater, but this is a one-man show, and she's putting it on for the only person she has left, herself. This is to reaffirm her faith in herself, to leave some impact for herself. And yes, for Boston too, but I think this is more all about her.
Yeah, I really love that connection, and I agree with you. That's exactly what she's doing here. And then as she flies away from the giant and retreats, she lands badly, and she essentially breaks her hand. And she says, "Ow!" She mewled the word, and she hated the sound. A 16-year-old should sound that young and small. She knew.
So first of all, she breaks her hand. She breaks her hand, Matt.
Yeah.
I don't even think we need to go into an explanation of this one. That it's just the hand imagery has just been so wonderfully covered throughout this entire arc that her breaking it here says everything. Like, I don't need to explain what that means for her character right now.
Yeah.
But I love the closing of that callback to the sound. Now it's been 3 years since she made a sound that was too young for her age at 13. 3 years. But underneath all the deaths, the power grab, the posturing, the theater, she's still that same girl. She's still making sounds too small for her age. And that's where we leave her in this chapter. That's where the Boston games end for her.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Fuck.
I know. And I like that this is a great like ending chapter for the Boston games, but it doesn't resolve all of the threads of Eclipse. And I was wondering if this was going to be the end of Eclipse actually when this chapter ended. And you know, I kind of was like 50-50, and it made sense that it wasn't, because while this is the end of the Boston games, it's not the end of how we got to where we are with Ashley.
Yeah. And this is, I think we'll get into this at the end of the chapter, but this is, I think, the difference between Ward and Worm.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if this arc was in Worm, it might end here.
Mm-hmm.
But Ward is talking about something different, and it's exploring something different. And so you're absolutely right that it's so important that we end this arc where it is. The conceit of this entire story has not been revealed yet. And so we have to get there before we end it.
Yes, exactly. So we move on into the final chapter of Eclipse, and Ashley is back in her hometown, and we'll soon learn that she's been lying low for quite some time now. It's actually been 4 years since she killed the giant, and she approaches some of the hometown hooligans and strikes up a conversation with Fappy, who isn't scared of her, unlike the younger kids.
I love how she's not even sure that this kid's name is Fappy. She's like, I think I remember this one. Fappy, right?
I'll call you Fappy.
No one ever actually calls him Fappy, and she never actually says the word Fappy out loud. So I'd like to think his name is like John or something, but she just couldn't remember it, and that's the first thing that popped into her head. It's just Fappy.
Yeah. You look like a Fappy.
Yeah.
So we learned that she's been, laid low for a while by a cut that became badly infected.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that having a squire to clean your wounds would really be helpful for.
Yep.
The details of this are really gruesome, Matt, because she's like, oh no, I got a cut. Let me use my power to blow away the bacteria that's getting in my cut.
And then,
that's not working. Let me take a shard of my leftover stuff to stab into the wound to open it up so I can really get my power up in there.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Turns out that your destruction power is not secretly a healing power.
Yeah.
So Fappy mentions that Stan and his girlfriend are both at the hospital, which, great, good. I'd like to thank our listeners for pointing out that this is the worst thing ever.
No, Matt, nothing bad happens at hospitals.
Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome, everyone. So he asks Damsel to help look after his younger relatives and make sure they don't get into trouble. But she basically just tells him, no, she can't really do that.
Yeah.
And then there's this great exchange. I might never see you again. It's bugging me. Should we have done anything different? I don't know what you're talking about. Fappy pulled off his hat and scratched at his hair. Should we have invited you to hang out or had a cigarette with you? When Stan had the room set up in the garage, we watched videos. Should we have had you over? Would that have been weird? Having been sick, her defenses weren't what they were supposed to be. The questions were hard to hear.
It's weird to think how tiny differences can balloon and end up defining who we are. And I think that's one of the overall messages of this thing, because Ashley scoffs at this thing. She says, yeah, that would have been weird. Shouldn't have done that. But would it have?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Would this small thing have been enough to set her down a better path?
And that's why it's hard to hear, I think, is she can't help but hear that and think things could have been different. Things could have, not even saying things could have been great, just things could be better than where they are now. Like I could have a couple of friends, instead of none. Even that would be a gift to her at this point. That's how bereft she is.
Yeah, and I wonder, thinking about this in the context of the larger story, she's just gone through this horrible incident. Well, it's 4 years ago, but in narrative sense, she's just gone through this horrible incident. And here we have kind of the aftermath of it. And I don't know if this version of Ashley has learned much from this thing. Like, the growth that we would want to see in this character, that we will see in the character by the end of this chapter, I don't know if this version of Ashley has experienced it, because once again, she scoffs at this idea. She says, no, like, I don't know if she's taken what she needs from this. And maybe it's not until it becomes someone else's memories entirely that the person can take what she needs from it.
I think it's also what Ashley has said to Victoria before, like, you're at rock bottom, right? She's at rock bottom right now, and then something is about to reach up from below and pull her down. And that's what it takes to get her to the point where she's like, you know what, I'm going to tap out of this whole situation and try something different. Because right now, she's stagnating. She's not getting worse and she's not getting better, really. Or maybe she is getting worse slightly, but the 9 come and they completely upset the apple cart.
I like that a lot. I forgot about that. You think you're at rock bottom and then something pulls you lower, because that is precisely what happens here. And I bet anything this is what she was thinking about when she said that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah, on her way back to her dwelling from this conversation, she finds a package of electrolyte drinks and the long-awaited chocolate eclairs delivered by Edict, presumably.
And I'm crying.
Yeah.
This is, even after everything that happened in Boston, all the disagreements they had, Mama Edict and Papa Licit still genuinely care about Ashley and want to help her and are helping her.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, what happens next doesn't make this a happy moment for me.
No.
Because now she hears sirens and it's some kind of disturbance. It took me the longest time to put this all together, by the way. Like it wasn't until like she thought someone was in her house, and I was like, oh, I get it.
I did not get it on my first read through. That's for sure.
Yeah. So she heads out into the night trying to figure out what the disturbance is, but she doesn't have any luck.
It certainly wasn't the hospital being attacked and everyone in it being horribly slaughtered by Hookwolf. That's not what happened.
No. Moving on. When she returns home, she has visitors, of course. Jack Slash is waiting, and she knows enough to know that she doesn't have much of a chance. She starts out trying flattery, not very successfully in the sense that she doesn't really seem to be persuading him of anything. I love this moment where, like, this is the first interaction with Bonesaw, basically. This person she'll have this complicated relationship with. And Bonesaw sees the eclairs and grabs one, and Jack tells her to ask permission, and she says, "Can I please?" And Ashley responds, "Yes, go ahead. Leave me one." To which I must wonder, how hard is it for Ashley to fight with those giant balls?
Well, when you think image and theater are the most important things in the world, Matt, you tend to get really fucking good at them.
Yeah.
That's such a badass moment.
She kind of decides that she's going to try to kill Bonesaw, since she can't really reach Jack.
Okay, then.
But Jack starts to work on her at this point. And since we have sequel awareness powers, we not only know like how this exact exchange ends, but we also know why. We know that Jack is subconsciously, outmaneuvering her like verbally and also powers-wise, targeting her need for attention and glory while also effortlessly staying out of her range.
Yeah.
And because of this, because she never really had a chance, she waits too long to make a move. Bonesaw and Jack cut off her hands kind of in concert. And it says she'd wanted what Jack was selling to her, and now she would have it.
Yeah, I think this moment is really great. I love how this plays out, and I love how we can see Jack's method working on her, even as she convinces herself that it's not. She keeps saying, "As soon as I get an opening, I'll attack. As soon as I get an opening, I'll attack." But I think everyone knows that opening is like never going to come. Mm-hmm. And as anything the Slaughterhouse 9 do, the actual choice here isn't so much of a choice. Mm-hmm. They were not going to let her go one way or another. But I think it is important that she recognizes that what he's selling, a part of her does want. A solution to her problem, a way towards control. She does want it, and yeah, she gets it.
Yeah, she never stopped wanting it after Boston. I think she just didn't have the capacity to go for it again.
Yeah,
and this is the hard lesson that she gets for not having learned the right lesson from Boston, like you said.
Yeah, and it all comes back to the hands once again, Matt. They're not just broken here, but cut off, removed, mm-hmm. Gone. Ashley, gone.
Yep. And then from here, we move rather murkily through time as she travels with the Nine to Accord's base and leads them inside, blowing away his ambassadors and finding Blasto in the basement. And Blasto doesn't recognize her.
Just to, rub salt in the wound. I killed your giant. Who?
Yep. I had actually gone back and read this chapter in Worm to refresh myself, and it first of all, it plays exactly this way. This is exactly the way it goes. And yeah, and I was like, I thought it was, I was like, honestly, I was like, I wonder if that was a mistake that Blasto didn't recognize her. And it's like, nope, Blasto just didn't recognize her. He just doesn't care. It's not important. So, and then of course, this is my favorite thing in the world is I'm going to bring back that line from chapter 4. Arms Master has discipline, Ashley said. He has more tools. And then connect that here in this final chapter. She had died in Blasto's lab. A hero she didn't even know had cut her in half. It was Arms Master. It was the guy that you respected and thought had discipline and thought was kind of a cool guy. He was the guy who killed you.
Yeah. That's really poetic and tragic and terrible.
I guess I don't have a lot more to say about that other than
you just lost your mind about it. I was there.
Yeah.
I witnessed it.
Yeah, I lost my mind in real time when I read this, and I'm just conveying that to everyone now. So then next after this, she remembers being in the tank grown by Bonesaw, then being euthanized in the tank many times, and then, being killed and everything. All of her other versions remember. And it says she had died in Blasto's lab, that part that I just read. She had metaphorically died when her core identity had been taken away from her. Her hands, her voice. The theater had been all she'd had, and she'd lost it. She had died in Bonesaw's lab. Over and over again, she had died. Many times she had been boiled alive. Her head had been cut open, the brain poked out while she was awake. 7 times she had died since leaving the lab. Now she reached out with bladed fingers closed around bladed fingers. They watched the world end. So that to me suggests that she may even remember what hashtag Slashly remembers.
Is that what we're calling her?
That's what
Slashly?
we're calling her. Slashly, okay. Independent of her own memories.
Yeah, I don't even know what to talk about here other than this is really emotionally impactful. And I think it's, repetition in speeches works really well, and it's because repetition in just about anything works really well. Repeating beats over and over again sells the impact of them. That's exactly what we're doing here. She died in Blasto's lab. She died when her identity had been taken from her. She died in Bonesaw Labs. 7 times she died, and now here at the end of the world, she's not dying. She's just holding hands with her clone friend. It's wow.
I know. So yeah, now she's in prison, such as it is, joined with her companion, another Ashley, who still has the modified arms with the blades. And we learned that, there was no incredible insight that our Ashley had that led her on a different course. She didn't have a revelation. It was just a meaningless difference between the two of them that caused her to make one choice and the other Ashley to make the other, and set them on 2 entirely different courses.
Yeah, it's so fucking brilliant. Like, here's our conceit revealing itself that the reason why they're different, or the seemingly start of the chain of events, is other Ashley answered the Bonesaw's question a second before she did and decided keep the hands.
Yeah.
And she made a different choice, and everything snowballed into these 2 different people looking at each other. Obviously, like, physically different. She points out her hair.
Yeah. Right. She the hair moment where she says, come in. I can't believe what you did to your hair. And Ashley says, it's so much lighter, which is just like the most poetic line in the whole arc to me.
This is so brilliant. Like, I love how else do we show the progress Ashley had made? How else do we show the growth and how far she's come? Let's compare her to herself, and not just her past, not just those memories that are unreliable, and in some cases maybe not even hers. Let's compare her to a literal version of herself that has just made different choices. Let's look at the literal difference between these 2 people. It's so incredible.
Yeah, and it's a great, it's a great device for talking about the human condition, because you're like, you're saying, okay, we literally have just like copied a person and perturbed one in the slightest way, and we look at this butterfly effect, and then we see where they end up, and we have, this is where Ashley has ended up. Slashly says, you have a friend. I have a lot of friends, Ashley said. I've had a lot of good days with bad days I can manage because I know more good days are coming.
And this is Ward, Matt. This is what this thing is all about. Above all else, This story is about hope, and throughout everything Ashley has been through in this arc, abuse, death, many deaths, hers and others, pain, fear, losing herself. Throughout all of this, it was the bad days and the days that made her dread the bad days. Now, at the end of all that, good days with days that can be managed. That's recovery. That's hope. This arc is really sad. It's so many terrible, sad things happen. The stuff that this kid has to go through, I can't believe she survived it all. And technically she didn't.
Yeah.
But at the end of it all, hope, light, the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The moon moves away from the face of the sun. And finally, as we wrap up this chapter, the two of them confirm that they both have memories that they shouldn't have. And not just from other people in past lives, because apparently there's a great plane of red-black crystal, one facet cracking and then mending in the span of a few seconds. The creaking sound and the dull static. It's a recollection that isn't exclusive to us.
So, good writing usually serves multiple purposes at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eclipse is a very unique arc. It's dropped in the middle of Torch. It's almost like the middle of a chapter. Chapter 7.4 is like half as long as most chapters. So it's almost as if this entire arc is just dropped in the middle of a chapter. And you could argue that this is just basically hitting the pause button on the story of Ward to explore Ashley a little bit more. And that wouldn't be entirely wrong. But Wildbow is a good writer. And he understands that just because it is that does not mean it can't be more than that. And it is. We've had several beats throughout this story about the connections between shards. We've had Rain's room. We've had this idea of this shard afterlife thing, that weird vision that Broken Trigger guy has right before he dies. We've had all these beats exploring this. And then we go to Eclipse that is filled with conversations about memories. And we learn at the end that when Riley stuffed some memories into these clones, the shards happily pulled data to plug the holes in those memories. But there's something else going on here too in this final moment. Something much seemingly more dire. This great plane of red-black crystal that's cracking and rehealing. That's our story. That's where our story is going. Whatever this is and how it relates to all this other weird stuff that's happening, that's where we're going. So in this arc, not only do we learn so much more about Ashley, we saw Ashley's growth, we reinforced the themes of the story, we also threw some plot pieces down. So this thing that is different from many of the other things we've seen in the story does all these things at the same time. And it was written in a week. A week.
Yeah. I don't think I have anything else to say about Eclipse. I was blown away by it, and I'm glad we got a chance to really go deep. I feel like we're going to be kind of reflecting back on it and talking about kind of the echoes of it as we go forward into the rest of the story.
I agree.
And I think that wraps it up for us. I think that's all we got for you this week on We've Got Ward. And as you guys are all part of this show now, feel free to provide us with advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's reading.
Man, we're all discombobulated because that was such an emotional ending.
I know.
You can reach us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter @gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is @ScottDaily85 and Matt's is @BlackBreadCrystalCrack. More dinner mail.
That would be an awesome name. If you're not already subscribed to We've Got Ward, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that you can listen to podcasts.
As always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film, and TV criticism, and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. This week, hopefully, we will have another Weaver Dice episode. We had one drop over the weekend, but we recorded one on Sunday, and hopefully that'll be out soonish. Not going to hold any promises there, but Weaver Dice, it's great.
Yeah.
Listen to it.
GarageBand willing. Yeah, we're having an enormous amount of fun with those. And,
it's so much fun.
And I'm really happy with how that's going. So yeah, check it out if you haven't.
Yeah.
So if you like any of our other shows and you want to support us, consider donating to our Patreon account, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. You can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Supporting us on Patreon gives you tons of great bonuses like voting in our quarterly fan art contests, Q&A sessions, access to live streams for our recordings, and our excellent Discord chat. And as always, while you're over there on Discord, make sure you stop by patreon.com/wildbow and donate to him as well. This is his world. We're just playing in it.
And if you cannot afford to donate right now, that's absolutely okay. There are tons of other ways you can help us. You can share the podcast with friends and not friends. And you can also go over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and a review. We've got no new reviews to read this week, which means you guys got some work to do. So get on it.
All right, that's it for the